thought pieces on issues on democracy that were happening. It allowed CDD also to flag governance misbehaviors as well. CDD sends election observers or expertise to other African countries or who need help with their elections. West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, is another example of the kinds of coalitions that CDD builds, not just locally, but on the continent, because WADEMOS is West Africa, bringing together different organizations to work on issues relating to democracy. And so in that sense, when you build coalitions, you join up actions, it's much more powerful, it has much more influence, it brings about, the possibilities that it will bring about change are even greater. Corruption Watch is another example of a CDD-led initiative in conjunction with GII that kept an eye on corruption and reported on corruption. But there's a lot of other advocacy issues. For example, CDD was influential in strengthening the position of the Auditor General and continues to advocate for independence of the Auditor General so that power can be held accountable. That's very important in a democracy. The center has not been without some controversy, particularly when research comes out that upsets certain institutions, certain political parties. They tend to pronounce a fatwa on us. But I always say that I'm proud that when they are not bearing the brunt of the research, they like to quote CDD. Part of the reason that can happen is that CDD remains non-partisan, non-biased, and tries as much as possible to be inclusive in all of its programs, no matter what. There's a very strong ethos of integrity that guides CDD. It's important that CDD remains credible, and I think is so far so good. I think when you ask the public, not only is CDD known and visible, but there's a recognition of what it contributes to the governance landscape, and there's a recognition that it is a credible, non-governmental institution. CDD has come a long, long way this past 25 years. Our footprints are felt all over the country. We have an office in the northern region, but we have operations in many more regions across Ghana. As we journey on, I'd like CDD to continue being true to its mission. That mission is to deepen democratic consolidation in Ghana. The mission also is to ensure that we have good governance in the country. And importantly also, we should have inclusive growth in our development. We need to pay attention to the marginalized people in this country, make sure that their rights are protected, their voices are heard, and their situations are made much better. And so we need strong institutions like CDD to ensure that we keep the pressure on duty bearers to do the right thing, because democracy, as we can see, is fragile. And in order that we make sure that we don't go back to the dark old days, we will need to be sure that CDD continues informing, educating, advocating in the governance and democracy space. Civil society is indispensable in any democratic arrangement, but particularly in the developing nation context, we need civil society organizations. Looking forward in 25 years, I wouldn't say I want to see more civil society organizations, because quantity is not always quality. It will be important for us to be able to grow relevant, strong civil society organizations that can elicit responsiveness from governments, from duty bearers. That's really important. You can try and hold people accountable, and you can do it, but it matters more that you are able to do it in ways that get them to respond appropriately, so that ultimately we bring about change. One of the things that I have been most proud of is to see the staff at CDD grow, not just in numbers. There were just a few people when CDD started. Now the staffing situation is 50 plus people, some of them not located in Accra, but also to see the value that is added once they join CDD. Over these 25 years, I think CDD has demonstrated its worth. We've been able to identify and work with integrity with many donors, many stakeholders. We've come to be trusted. We intend to continue to work with all of our donors and stakeholders, and to make sure that our relationship with them is mutually beneficial. It's important that people have experiences with CDD that they find positive, and that keeps them coming back to work with us. I trust that that's the situation right now, and 25 years more down the line, that would be the situation. I'd like to wish CDD a happy silver anniversary. 25 years is short, but it's also long in the lifespan of an organization. It's a significant milestone that I pray we will continue to add to in the coming years. Good luck and God bless.
Over the past 25 years, CDD-Ghana has struck remarkable wins in the democracy and governance landscape in Ghana and on the continent. From empowering ordinary citizens through data-driven research to safeguarding electoral integrity, championing transparency and accountability, and advocating for inclusive development, the Center's journey has been defined by impactful initiatives and steadfast dedication. Now, to celebrate our 25th anniversary, we embarked on an outreach program in 3 regions across the country. The goal of the outreach program was to provide our stakeholders a platform to assess our works and receive feedback. Now, in this short summary video, we talked to some beneficiaries of CDD-led initiatives and what was gathered from the outreach. First, our research analyst, Guilfred Esiama, who led the team on the Western Regional Outreach, gave highlights of what was gathered.
At the engagement, we got to know from them the things that we've been doing well, some of the gaps that we have over the past 25 years, and also to satisfy their curiosity about the way we operate as an organization. So on the things that people want to see us doing better, it's around our advocacy. They want to see CDD-Ghana more vociferous on the issues that come up in the country, especially issues around economic governance, economic mismanagement. Again, people are also expecting, or they've been expecting CDD-Ghana to consistently be promoting and championing local government or local governance. We got to know that when it comes to the practice of local government. It is very weak at the local level. Again, they also want to see CDD-Ghana championing the election of MMDC that was promised by this government. We also got to know that people are also more interested in CDD-Ghana taking up the inclusiveness agenda and then promoting the rights of persons living with disability. So these are things that people felt we haven't been doing much, and they want to see us doing better.
Very insightful feedback from the Western region. Now, let's move the train to the Ashanti region, where Paul Osei-Kufuor led a team on the outreach.
When we had the conversations, it came out strongly that a lot of the stakeholders really appreciate what we do as a center, especially the kind of knowledge products and evidence that we produce. They specifically mentioned our work around Afrobarometer. They also spoke about our election work. And for election, one of the key points had to do with CODIO. They were very clear about what they want cities to do. They want us to connect strongly with the grassroots. They think that our work, much as it's decentralized, there is still a lot of openings and spaces for us to connect strongly with local actors, the various citizen groups at the local level. I can mention the substructures, the area councils, the urban councils, especially where citizens really operate their day-to-day living and where livelihoods can be meaningfully impacted. That is at the community level. So they want us to interrogate policies and programs deployed by government that seeks to benefit communities and localities. Another major recommendation had to do with how we enhance inclusion for young people. They think that CDD must diversify strongly our actors and players that we engage at all levels. So we should have a strong and a very robust program that will engage young people over a long period of time in a very strategic, coordinated way. Then the last one also was about it's also about diversity, how we bring on board our audience and stakeholders who are not used to the Queen's language, and basically how do we embed strongly local languages in our programs and activities.
Well, you heard it all from the Ashanti region. Now let's move all the way up north, where Mavis Zubok Dome, research analyst, and Dr. Edem Selumi, director of research, led the team to meet the Tamale stakeholders.
The Tamale engagement, which forms part of our 25th anniversary engagement with stakeholders across the country, has been great. It was great. It brought together stakeholders across civic space, media, individuals, youth, women, campaign financing. They felt that that area have not been regulated and have brought a lot of issues, and so CDD should champion work around regulating campaign financing in the country. The other issue that particularly from the youth and the women that they wanted to see CDD doing more on is the issue of their involvement in civic space. We want to see CDD working more around championing and advocating and promoting women and youth engagement in civic spaces. People really spoke their mind on issues and CDD's work. It was really great hearing from people, me working at CDD, some of the things they were saying, I was surprised, because in as much as you measure your impact, it is good hearing from the people you work with, have engaged with in one way or another what they think your impact have been. It wasn't business as usual. It's not because they came for a training program, and it is not because we are collaborating with them to carry out a project or an activity, but just having feedback from them. It was really revealing that what they thought CDD can do, the power that CDD have to impact on democracy and governance, is it's great knowing the amount of trust that people have in you, the amount of confidence that people have in you to do certain things.
Now you heard it from the team leads. Is 10 of the beneficiaries of CDD-led initiatives. This was what they had to say.
CDD has done so well over the years. Even today, I've gotten to know that some of the very important activities that are associated with our democratic practice are being sponsored or initiated by CDD-Ghana. As for the Afrobarometer data, I am aware of it. Some of us in academia have made use of it. I have done about 2 or 3 papers in relation to that. That's a very useful data set. Then I didn't know it was CDD that also sponsored activities of CODEO and then the district league table. These are very important activities in our democratic dispensation.
I've worked with CDD for a very long time, at least for the past 20 years, with Professor Jima Boidi and later on Mr. Paul. All CDD programs, I was involved because the palace was involved. Professor Jima Boidi even came to the palace, and his interactions with the chief at that time was very cordial. And I think that relationship has grown to today. And from sitting outside and hearing what CDD does, especially in our local governance system of the country, is par excellent. And I would entreat them, to do more engagement with stakeholders, especially with the traditional authorities.
When you go to Terminal 3 of KIA, you would get to know that young people have lost confidence in our democracy because they want to leave the shores of Ghana. And it is as a result of our inability to consolidate the democracy that was birthed in the 1990s. CDD is actually doing a great job in this regard because it's actually trying to instill in us the values of democracy, and as young people, we are ever ready to embrace it.
As a person with disability, I did participate in many of CDD's work in terms of CODEO's work monitoring elections. I did participate together with some of the disabled people in the northern region as well as other parts of the country in CDD's research on Afrobarometer and other research work, where we look at security, civilian relation. People with disability did participate, and I, as a person, I participated. So CDD in its work as a totality or as a whole is very inclusive. As today, the program, they did invite us, and we have participated and we did contribute. They could have left us out, but looking at where we come from, there is more information where they could get from us. That's why they included us.
I joined the center, that's CDD-Ghana, on the 5th of January 2001. And I came here as a cleaner. I was changed to be in charge of the facility. Initially, I didn't know anything about democracy. And even though when I came in, I was told how democracy means, I understood it in a different way. But as time goes on, I've really understand when they say democracy, what it talks about, and how it means and how it stands for. When you are ready or you are humble to learn something, the directors are free. You can ask them any questions and kind of thing. Whenever there is a program, you can go and sit in, you can get a handout and then learn something from it. It's a place that when you don't know something, they can groom you and then make sure that at least you become somebody, and therefore, even if it is not your field, you can be able to understand what is going on.
The regional outreach program has indeed been an interesting and revealing moment for the center, especially in its engagement with its stakeholders. This undoubtedly will map out the center's strategic 5-year plan as it continues to bridge research and practice to promote good governance.
My journey with CDD started some 25 years ago, right at the beginning of when it was established. I was on the first board. I had gotten to know some of the founding directors, Professor Jima Buedi, Professor Bafu Ajimandria, as colleagues who I had encountered at the first think tank in Ghana, which was IEA. And I've watched CDD just grow over the years in stature, in influence, in terms of staffing. There were just a few staff members, a few programs, but a clear vision and mission to intervene in the governance space, to help to contribute in the deepening of our new democracy. Today, I would say CDD is considered as the foremost think tank on governance issues in Ghana. There are others, even the ones that may have been founded just around the time of CDD or perhaps earlier, are not as prominent as CDD is now, and I'm very proud of that. CDD has really been at the forefront of many governance issues. One of the clearest ways in which CDD started to intervene right from the beginning is to make sure that there would be quality electoral democracy, which meant that we needed to keep an eye on elections and the quality of elections. And of course, one of the most significant contributions of CDD in that space, amongst many contributions, is the setting up of CODEO. It's a coalition of domestic election observers headed by two eminent Ghanaians at the beginning, Justice VCRC Crab and Professor Miranda Greenstreet. And they have been able to preside and chair over CODEO in a very credible manner. It's hard to imagine elections today in Ghana without CODEO. Everybody has come to expect that CODEO will be there to observe the elections, to pronounce on it. Then, of course, Afrobarometer has been a major contribution derived from CDD. There'd be no Afrobarometer if there'd been no CDD-Ghana. And Afrobarometer, as you know, is a public opinion polling instrument where it takes the pulse of ordinary people around Africa. Some 38 countries already and growing, aiming for 40 countries, where it takes the pulse of ordinary people on issues that matter to them, service provision, governance issues. And in that way, it informs public policy. But it's also a very important data set for researchers and academics who are writing on issues relating to governance and service provision. So we can't overemphasize the importance of Afrobarometer. One of the things that CDD did in the beginning, it sort of discontinued it, but plans to come back to it, is Democracy Watch. And Democracy Watch was a regular publication that functioned as a space for thought pieces on issues on democracy that were happening. It allowed CDD also to flag governance misbehaviors as well. CDD sends election observers or expertise to other African countries or who need help with their elections. West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, is another example of the kinds of coalitions that CDD builds, not just locally, but on the continent, because WADEMOS is West Africa, bringing together different organizations to work on issues relating to democracy. And so in that sense, when you build coalitions, you join up actions, it's much more powerful, it has much more influence, it brings about, the possibilities that it will bring about change are even greater. Corruption Watch is another example of a CDD-led initiative in conjunction with GII that kept an eye on corruption and reported on corruption. But there's a lot of other advocacy issues. For example, CDD was influential in strengthening the position of the Auditor General and continues to advocate for independence of the Auditor General so that power can be held accountable. That's very important in a democracy. The center has not been without some controversy, particularly when research comes out that upsets certain institutions, certain political parties. They tend to pronounce a fatwa on us. But I always say that I'm proud that when they are not bearing the brunt of the research, they like to quote CDD. Part of the reason that can happen is that CDD remains non-partisan, non-biased, and tries as much as possible to be inclusive in all of its programs, no matter what. There's a very strong ethos of integrity that guides CDD. It's important. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I will make it as informal as possible, so forgive me. On behalf of the board, management, and staff of CDD-Ghana, let me welcome you all to this very important roundtable on what I consider the intractable challenge of corruption, poor governance, and state capture that has confronted us for a long time and for which progress seems to be rather elusive. As many of you know, CDD is an independent, not-for-profit research and advocacy think tank on a mission to promote and deepen democratic consolidation, good governance, and inclusive growth and development in Ghana and in Africa generally. And as part of how we try to achieve these goals is through evidence-based research, through partnerships with other like-minded organizations, and today we're very proud to partner the University of Ghana Business School. And also through dialogues, conversations of matters of importance to the public good. We at CDD, and I suspect all of you here gathered have observed with rather sinking hearts how poorly we continue to do on governance/corruption indices. We have on our agenda experts who will speak to that. So I will not get into much detail except to say that without foreknowledge of, say, the Afrobarometer survey results that we're going to hear today, I am willing to wager with anybody who has money to lose that the survey will not be good news. Now, why do I say this? Simple. Both anecdotal evidence, media evidence, reports like the recent one that GACC just launched, just produced, the 2023 GACC Corruption Report, recent indices from reliable sources such as the World Bank's Government Effectiveness Index, and then Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, the CPI as we commonly call it, have shown that here in Ghana, we're losing the fight against corruption. 10 years ago, our CPI score was at the time we thought, a rather low 46%, and we wanted to do something about improving it. But instead of improving on that, despite all the interventions, including the CDD-led anti-corruption campaign called Corruption Watch, and there were lots of partners involved in that. And also, despite political promises to root out corruption, we are stuck at an even worse score of 43%. And in consonance with that, our position on the CPI compared to other countries keeps slipping. We've gone from 54th position in 2015, for example, to 73rd position today. Imagine if it was your child showing you such a report card, and a 2023 CPI will be launched tomorrow. And I'm not holding my breath. As we like to say when we are baffled here in Ghana, are we coming or are we going? Well, I hope this afternoon's conversation will provide some answers by highlighting the magnitude of the problem for sure, but also helping us think through the challenges that confront all of us who are invested in advocating for and working to ensure a cleaner, better functioning public sector in Ghana. And today, we have quite a rich diversity of actors assembled. We have government officials and policymakers, including the two heads of our foremost anti-corruption agencies who are billed to speak to us this afternoon. And we know that the Office of the Special Prosecutor has just handed over a very crucial and sensitive case to YOKO. And so we are hoping, and my sister, who now heads YOKO, we are hoping that, there'll be a lot of transparency, a lot of momentum put behind this case, and so that Ghanaians will have a little bit more confidence that we have institutions that work and that are as robust as other institutions that we like to admire and quote when it comes to tackling corruption and economic crimes. So we have that. We have CSO leaders amongst us as well. We have members of academia, we have media people, we have youth leaders, and in fact, we have students, ordinary citizens who refuse to be spectators. So I think we have something going for us here this afternoon. And I'm optimistic that we will leave here with much better clarity of what ought to be done in improving this unacceptable status quo and the role we must play collectively and individually to ensure better outcomes. So on that note, I'd like to again welcome you and thank you for your attendance and your attention. And I'd like to invite my good friend, Professor Justice Baole, who is partnering us today to take over from me. Prof.
Thank you very much, Prof. The evergreen. It's good to see you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for making time to come to the University of Ghana Business School. We got approached by CDD for this very important event, and for many reasons, including my very personal reasons of someone who has interest in issues of ethics, and I've taught it for many years, and the difficulties of explaining to students the contradiction of what I teach and what happens in the world out there. I thought this would be a very good opportunity to get the people who can answer the questions about the disparity, or if you like, the difference between what I say in the lecture hall and what happens in the world out there. So we're happy to be part of this activity. But if you wanted a bit more of reasons why this conversation is important, I give you 2 or 3 scenarios, and these are real-life scenarios. My brother, who I come directly after, is a farmer in Yeji, a village 18 kilometers away from the Yeji town. There's no motorable road to the place. There is no clinic or hospital in that place. The wife, who had 5 children already, on the 6th one was pregnant. On the way to the farm, she started bleeding and had to be put on the back of a motorbike. So somebody sits in front, the pregnant, bleeding woman is in the middle, and somebody, because she was unconscious, somebody has to be at the back and to hold her up. And she makes that road 18 kilometers to Yeji and is pronounced dead with a baby. The one that comes directly after me, wife sick, goes to the Yeji hospital because they live in Yeji town. The Matthias hospital is not properly equipped. The woman starts bleeding. The doctor says, well, we have to refer you, and the nearest hospital they can get to is the Mampong hospital, and that's almost like 3 hours ahead. And midway, the woman is dead. She gets to the hospital, pronounced dead, the baby is dead. So in my family alone, I can feel what it is like to not have what other states do for their citizens. And if you were looking for reasons why we don't have that, one of the reasons could be that the monies that are meant for developing the state and addressing the concerns of citizens is hiding in somebody's pocket. Here in the business school, I had this school, the building we are in was built in 1962. At the time, the school had 198 students in all. So from the first level, diploma, whatever, 192 students. And when I read the records, that day I wasn't able to leave the office because I felt extremely depressed. Today, 61 years on, not a single block has been added to this building. I now have, in a single cohort of students to take, I take 2,000. So in a normal course of lecture day, you come into this building, there are over 8,000 students in the building that was built at the time that there were just about 198 students. No, you ask yourself the question, so what's the problem? The problem is that the state needs to invest in educational infrastructure, and that is not happening. On the flip side, I'm supposed to charge every student $120 a year, and Parliament says you can't increase the fee. And excuse me, because just past lunchtime, the money is not even able to pay for the toiletries, the detergent, toilet roll, hand towels that I need to let the over 8,000 students use that in a single year. And this year, I had over 21,000 students apply to enter the business school alone. I could take only 2,000. The result was great. A lot of students qualified. Every year we would have taken aggregate 9. This year we took aggregate 7. And parents, and including politicians, came wanting me to expand and to take more. We are unable to take. And this is what public funds can do. So, ladies and gentlemen, the conversation here, and it's a global conversation, oftentimes we take it to be for just us. But why not? Because this is where we are affected. So I'm excited that we have this conversation. I'm going to have some very seasoned people to talk to us on new frontiers in governance, state capture, and corruption worldwide, implication for Ghana and Africa. And as you can see, we're going to be served a meal. Will I allow you to do the rest? Otherwise, we have a number of people that are able to speak. Mavis would speak to us. Mavis is the research analyst and coordinator at CDD-Ghana and is in charge of the Afrobarometer surveys, Africa and Ghana. She would present to us very soon. Mavis, are you here? Okay, thank you very much. And when Mavis is done, we have Bright Simmons who will be joining us online. Bright will be speaking to us very soon after Mavis, and because of his engagement, we are changing the program lightly. When we're done with Bright speaking to us, and I'm sure many of us are very familiar with Mr. Bright Simmons, he is with Imani Ghana and a very provocative individual. He is able to stoke fire where creates a lot of uncomfortable situation for people. Bright, if you are listening to us, we appreciate the work that you do. Once we receive Bright, we would also receive Professor Daniel Kaufman, who is a senior fellow at the R4D and the Brookings Institute. For many years, he worked with the World Bank and will be talking to us on new frontiers in governance, state capture, and he will throw a lot of light. I told Daniel that as a student, I read a lot of his articles because I've had interest in corruption for a very long time, and part of my thesis I was looking at that. So it's good to meet you today. We would have two very prominent public servants in Ghana. The first is Mr. Kisi Ejabin, who is a lawyer and a colleague of ours in the law school, who now serves as the special prosecutor. And he would give us some indications on the efforts and challenges that the Office of the Special Prosecutor faces in their quest to combat corruption. Not to stop corruption, to combat corruption. And then we are privileged to have on the panel another lady, Mamiya Tiwa Adodankwa, who is, if you know, a senior police officer and the executive director of YOKO. Currently, she would be telling us about the fight against corruption also from the perspective of YOKO. So we have our afternoon, the lunch is well served. I invite you to sit relaxed, make notes, and let's engage subsequently. But first, let's take Mavis. Please put your hands together as we receive Mavis to come and talk to us. For those of you who love to read on corruption, if you see some of the figures, you will cry. But Mavis, please suit our, and don't let us be, the way you say it, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Good afternoon to all. Can I start? Yes, okay. Good afternoon once again. It's lovely to be here and have a good number of different actors here to discuss issues on corruption. I will be presenting mainly on Afrobarometer findings on corruption in Africa and Ghana. So I'll start by introducing the Afrobarometer for the benefit of those whom it's their first time. Afrobarometer is a Pan-African research organization that provides reliable data on experiences, evaluation, and African citizens regarding democracy, governance, and quality of life. The goal is to give African public a voice in policy and decision making, and the objective is to gather high-quality data, share this data and findings widely with policy actors, media, citizens to impact policy, and also to build capacity for data collection, analysis, and communication. Afrobarometer started in 1999 and is currently in over 39 countries, about 41 now, for this current round 10. The surveys vary depending on the country. Some started in 1999 and then section. We have, first of all, the samples are nationally representative and adult citizens are interviewed. That's 18 and above. The interviews are conducted face-to-face in the language of the respondent's choice. Standard questionnaires are used that is to allow for comparison across countries and over time, and a sample size of 1,200 to 2,400 yield a country-level results with a margin of sampling error of plus or minus 2, and to plus or minus 3 percentage points. So the sample size varies depending on the country. So now, straight to the findings. Just as Prof mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of decline in our scoring, African countries scoring in corruption perception indexes over the years. However, when it comes to the issue of what is their most important problem, despite the fact that corruption is quite erosive and affects development, affects democracy, affects security, from the findings, you would see that on the average, African countries, it is rated as the 11th most important problem that they want government to address. And that is 11% of citizens saying that it is their topmost priority that they want government to address. This is far behind unemployment, management of the economy, health, and water. Now, when we look closely at corruption alone as a most important problem that citizens want government to address, it is, though it is not the topmost concern when you put Africa across all the 39 African countries surveyed together, but when it is a high priority in countries like Kenya, where we have 35% of citizens mentioning it as their topmost problem. It's the first topmost problems for Kenya in 2022 when the citizens were surveyed. Also, high percentages are also recorded in Cameroon, Mauritania, Namibia, South Africa, Uganda. Ghana as well, we have 14% of citizens citing corruption as a most important problem that they want government to address. And closely looking at the most important problems for Ghanaians, it is the 7th most important problem for Ghanaians that they want government to address. The countries that just a handful did mention corruption as a most important problem, you have Benin, Guinea, and Cape Verde. Now looking at the various demographics that we have, we consider in our surveys, closely you would notice that it's among the persons with post-secondary education. When you take the 39 countries average, persons with post-secondary education, that a lot of them, 18%, cited corruption as a most important problem. That is the only difference, but all others, the percentages, there isn't much significant differences when you look at the various demographics. When you look at Ghana closely as well, you have persons that have post-secondary education, persons who live in urban area, men, youth, and persons 56 years and above, also concerned about corruption. Has corruption increased over the past 12 years? At the time of the survey, on average, the average across the 39 countries surveyed, nearly 6 in 10 citizens, that is 58%, says the level of corruption in their country have increased somewhat or a lot during the previous 12 months. Majority in 27 of the 39 surveyed, if you look at the survey this closely, in the majorities from 50 and above, that says corruption have increased. And if you look at the countries at the top where they say corruptions have increased, you have Eswatini, 87% of citizens citing that corruption have increased. South Africa, 82% citing that corruption have increased. Lesotho, 81%. Sudan, 80%. Ghana, 77%. When Africans were asked to assess the involvement of various public officials in corruption, a more common face that you will find that stands out here is the police being mentioned persistently and topping the perception of widespread corruption. On average, across the 39 countries, almost half of citizens say that most or all police officials are involved in corruption. In addition, we have 41 also saying that some are involved in corruption. Tax officials, civil servants, officials at the presidency tie up when you look at most corrupt or all corrupt at 38% of citizens citing that. This is followed by members of parliament, 36%, business executives, 36%, judges and magistrates, 35%, local government council, 32% of citizens saying most or all are corrupt. When we look at overtime trend, again, from 2014 to 2023, where consistently the question have been asked in 31 countries, perceptions of widespread corruption has worsened for officials at the office of the presidency from 31 to 39, member of parliament from 35 to 42, judges and magistrates from 33 to 36, while stagnating for police and local government council. When we look closely at that of Ghana, again, between 2014 and 2022, it also shows an increase in perception of widespread of corruption among officials at the presidency, parliament, judges and magistrates, and a decrease in percentage point for local government council. These findings tend to suggest that either anti-corruption efforts to date are either ineffective or insufficient to reduce corruption among key public agencies across Africa. When citizens were asked how often, if ever, they have paid bribe, given a gift, or do a favor to get services, citizens who have access various public services have indicated one way or another that they have paid or given gift. And this really shapes the discussion around the issues of corruption, because this is really their lived experience that tells us their experience with corruption, for which that form their perception around issues around corruption. So on the average, across the 39 countries surveyed, more than 1 in 3 adults who interacted with the police during the previous year said they have given bribe, given a gift, or done a favor for a service. 36% saying to sought for assistance, and 37% saying when they encounter a problem that they have paid bribe or given a gift to get that. Also, among citizens who tried obtaining government documents such as birth cert, driver's license, passport, and voter's ID, 31% says they paid a bribe at least once. If you look closely again to the charts in green, you would see that of Ghana, and it shows that 36% said they gave a gift, paid, bribed, or provided a favor to avoid police problem. 45 say to obtain assistance from the police. 28 says to obtain a government document. 14% to obtain service from a public hospital facility, and 16% to obtain school services. Considering that most Africans say corruption is increasing, and many report personal experiences with having to pay bribe, it is not surprising then to see that 2/3 here out of the 39 surveyed say the government is failing when it comes to fighting corruption. Only 6 countries recorded a majority approval of their government performance in corruption, led by Benin 77, Tanzania 65, and Zambia 61. In contrast, not more than 1 in 10 citizens give their government a passing grade. In South Africa, 10%, Eswatini 10%, Gambia 10%, Congo, Brazzaville 8%, Sudan 7%. In Ghana, the approval was 14%. Again, what can ordinary citizens do when it comes to fight against corruption? Can citizens report corruption without fear? On the average, across the 39 countries surveyed, a large majority, 71% of respondents, believe that they risk retaliation or other negative consequences if they speak out. Only 1 in 4, that is 26%, say corruption can be reported without fear. Mauritania is the only country surveyed where a majority, 61% of respondents say that they can feel free to report corruption. Only 10% of Nigerians say this. Gabon, 9% also says the same. For Ghana, we have 30% saying that they can report corruption without fear. So I will pause here to inform the discussion. It's just to inform the discussion today on issues of corruption and state capture. In summary, though corruption may not be the topmost among across the 39 countries surveys, is still a huge problem by majorities in some countries that they want government to address. Most of them cite corruption among police as one of the widespread corruption. Bribery in public places is evident. Also, fear of retaliation is evidence from the findings, and performance of governance failing in the fight to combat corruption is also prominent in the findings. Thank you very much.
Oh, you want to put your hands together for Mavis. Thank you so much for the very excellent and frightening presentation. I'm sure that as we sit here, we know I often would ask my student in the first class, if there was my first day in class, is there anyone here who, if your father were the president, you will come to Legon? Or that you would go to Legon Hospital, or you will be in my class, and it's usually 0. And so everybody says, if their father were the president, here we are not talking about public officers, we are talking about people who are related to public officers, and the extent to which they can be bold to want to take access to public office for personal gain. And so I think that the data that we have speaks to the issues that we all are very, very much aware. In some cases, I think the data is even modest. But let's hold on now, and then we would get back to the conversation. So take notes, whatever notes you have taken, let's keep that now. We would go straight to the lines and try and catch Mr. Bryce Simmons. We gave him but that nonetheless, I know that I introduced you earlier that you cause a lot of trouble for people, but that's what it is. We are happy to have you. Mr. Bryce Simon is with Imani Ghana and does many other things. But today he's speaking to us about state capture. Bright, if you can hear me, over to you, and please talk to us. I think you have 15 minutes or so to speak to us. Over to you. Thank you very much, Prof, for a very warm welcome. My gratitude to CDD. I note that the Executive Director of Imani has also joined us. So this is a full-fledged Imani team, at least both in the physical realm as well as in the moral realm, delivering these remarks for the benefit of the audience. Obviously, the subject matter is of great interest, and I note that some of the partners that have come together, including the University of Ghana Business School, that Prof represents, and the World Bank, have been working together for many years to try and resolve this. My mission is fairly simple. I hope that I can be heard loud and clear in the hall. I'm here to discuss one dimension of corruption, and that is state capture. I also hope that my screen is visible. Wonderful, Prof. So to start off, I think there is an intuitive feel for what state capture means, because we do see uncritical use of the term in the public media, in the general press, and perhaps even in ordinary conversation. So I have, put on the screen a recent provocative front page article by Africa Watch, where the view was that the entire country of Ghana was luxuriating in state capture. We've also seen, placards of demonstrations in the country where the state capture term has been on clear display. I think, though, that when you look at the uncritical use of the term, it tends to be confused somewhat with grand corruption generally. So some people will argue that, the famous YOKO scandal that sprang onto our public imagination and consciousness about a decade ago is an element, a species, it's an example of state capture. As we proceed further in this conversation, to be clear that, to keep the term meaningful, we have to be somewhat stricter than perhaps necessary, and not regard any instance of grand corruption as state capture. So, for instance, YOKO will not be an example of state capture. And I guess, as I explain further down the line, it will be clear why that is not. The truth, of course, is that there's a very sophisticated history of inquiry behind this notion of state capture. And we have a person of no mean stature than Dr. Kaufman himself, one of the pioneers of this line of inquiry in our midst. And even though I mentioned one or two aspects of the work that he and others within the World Bank and elsewhere have done, I do not intend at all to steal his thunder. I'll have to clarify, though, that when we think of that sophisticated line of inquiry around state capture, which I'll mention in a moment, we do get it entangled somewhat with other concepts from the Western tradition, both from the Western sociological tradition as well as the Western political tradition, about illiberalism and authoritarianism, etc. And you will find that typically in the literature that is before this particular strain of World Bank literature got on the scene around the turn of the millennium, you will see that state capture was heavily implicated in authoritarianism, illiberalism, the idea of the states being unaccountable and stuff like that. And it's not too surprising because when you really look at the particular strain of state capture literature that I'm going to discuss in a second, the one that was pioneered at the World Bank, you do see that it's happening in parts of the world that had been under authoritarian control for many, many years, for decades, in fact, such as in the post-Soviet space. So the fact that, illiberalism, authoritarianism, etc., gets entangled with state capture is understandable from the Western point of view. Now, we have, of course, this fascinating phenomenon in Africa where some of the countries that are fairly democratic by every measure, so Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and the rest, are also places where you see very elevated levels of state capture, sometimes higher than you see in authoritarian states like Rwanda or Mauritania or elsewhere. So it's very interesting that, in one of the ways in which we intend to proceed, we intend to break from the Western conceptualization of this phenomenon. And one of those approaches is to say that the liberalism authoritarian link does not really foster
much understanding of the African condition. And we'll come back to this difference between Africa and elsewhere in a minute. Another thriving literature, which we will not delve into, but which also provides us with some of the intellectual heritage for the discussion we're about to have, is the one about elite capture, which tends to be very prominent in South Asia, in parts of the Middle East and elsewhere. I don't have the time to take you through the elite capture literature, but it's also a very interesting species of analysis and inquiry that has a role to play if we want to understand the origins, the intellectual origins of this phenomenon of state capture. So now having gone on this ridiculous detour, I'm beginning to hone in on some home truths. Yes, around 1997, the World Bank got this invitation, but I'm pretty sure they were also very excited themselves to recommend themselves to the CIS countries, the post-Soviet transition economies in Eastern Europe and in Eurasia, around this phenomenon of corruption, which was getting out of hand. And around that period, you will begin to see very interesting framing of state capture begin to emerge, because the evidence before our eyes in those days was very stark in those parts of the world. Why? Because if you think of it, the Soviet Union and its vassal states in the Warsaw Pact and elsewhere had been primarily state-owned, had primarily run state-run economies, state-owned and run economies. And then they very rapidly privatized. Some of you remember the famous shock therapy, where some people that today are more considered to be more on the left of the global ideological spectrum, like Professor Jeffrey Sachs and others, were involved in rapid privatization across that part of the world. So all of a sudden, you had countries without a culture of private sector conduct, having to run private sector corporations that previously have been state-run corporations. It wasn't surprising then that a lot of these corporations continue to behave as if, they were still state-managed entities, in the sense that the entanglement between the owners, the so-called oligarchs in the case of Russia and elsewhere, the Russian Federation and elsewhere, had themselves typically come from positions within the political establishment. Some of them had been operatives in the intelligence service and elsewhere. They come now to run businesses. So having come to run businesses, it's not surprising that they will attempt to co-opt the state into furthering their private interest. So this was a very fertile ground for developing this theory and this concept of state capture. I think that it was developed to the point where it was impressively empirical. And I see some of the work that, at that time captured the imagination of scholars around the world. And Prof, you've mentioned that you yourself was a devotee of this species of literature. And one of the things that made it beautiful was how empirical it was and how you could compare countries based on how state capture had pervaded public life or business life and to what extent. The West, we've always had this ideological minefield around the role of big corporations. And I think if you are speaking to Western observers of this phenomenon, they will mention that the military-industrial complex in the United States, certain major pharmaceutical corporations in places like Switzerland and Western Europe are engaged in the phenomenon of state capture. And they will have various arguments that they will make. I think that we should not get distracted by some of those parallels. And I hope that I'll be able to explain that in Africa, we have a unique phenomenon that we need to grapple with. I think that part of the reason why the classical framing of state capture does not work too well when you are trying to describe the situation as it pertains in Africa, and particularly in Ghana, which is obviously our primary interest in this endeavor that we are currently engaging in. If you think of it, the private sector, even compared to the transition economies, has never been as well defined for a very long time. And by what do I mean by that? What I mean is that when you think of the broader private sector, the informality that had characterized the wider private sector in Africa tended to overshadow the small formal institutions that perhaps are similar to what you find in the transition economies and certainly what you find in the OECD countries. So even at its most underdeveloped, the private sector in the transition countries, in Romania, in Bulgaria, in the Russian Federation, in Kazakhstan, elsewhere, was still predominantly formal. So I was looking at some of the statistics over the years as I was preparing for this talk, and they never attained the level of informality that we've seen in Africa of 70%, 80% informality across the private sector. That's very, very significant. That's significant also because it created certain conditions in which for a long time, the private sector in Africa was perceived as composed of victims. So we saw the private sector in Africa as one that was experiencing repression and suppression. And most of our concern was around the crowding out of the private sector. So think about it. Around 1997, 98, all the way to 2001, this whole classical framing of state capture in the World Bank tradition was taking shape. In Ghana, the concern was not about big corporations that had oligarchs at the helm and which were trying to co-opt the state to further their private interests. A lot of the concern around 1997 to 2001 in Ghana was about the private sector being crowded out due to government policies of financial repression, due to policies that disfavor private enterprise. So it is very difficult to see the specific conditions of Ghana placed against the canvas that have been created in the classical framing. Private sector was not seen as threatening. It was not seen as engaged in any activity that could be considered oligarchic or could be considered as state capture in that classical framing. And that has continued until maybe I would say around the first, the turn of the first decade of the 21st century, when the likes of, big companies like RLG, Zoomlion, and the rest with large government contracts in Ghana started to surface. And then some of these conversations slowly trickled into the public consciousness. Given that our concerns was about a private sector that had been emaciated, a private sector that had been repressed, a private sector that had been suppressed, a private sector that had been crowded out by government policies around fiscal mismanagement, etc., high borrowing costs for government that made it impossible then for private sector to borrow because the government has set certain benchmarks, etc. Given those concerns, given those factors in play, it's not surprising that state capture was never well defined in our context and never had the same ideological appeal that they had in the transition economies and certainly in certain ideological factions in the OECD. I would say that created conditions in which this phenomenon of state capture carefully, subtly, perniciously invaded our landscape without us paying too much attention. I think it was a bit of a honeypot trap in that we all went gung-ho in supporting the private sector, talking about how the private sector was underdeveloped, talking about how the private sector was repressed, and talking about how the conditions had to be created to enable the flourishing of the private sector. And so while the state capture elements were evolving, we're completely non-vigilant. We lack the vigilance that elsewhere, as part of intellectual traditions and as part of projects, intellectual projects of different kind, academic projects of different kind, will have enabled us to become more alert to the emergence of this phenomenon. I also think that the way in which state capture has manifested itself has been such that it really not often presented in the forms of private sector advancement that sometimes apologists for state-business strategic interactions often do in, say, Nigeria, where when you talk about Dangote or Bua, you see a lot of Nigerians say, no, we think that this is a Nigerian champion. And even though they may get dollars at lower, a far lower price than some SME will get it, we think that, a multi-billion-dollar champion such as Dangote deserves it. Or if you talk to people in Morocco or Egypt or country and they see these big private sector conglomerates as national champions. I think in our case, that's not how generally they've been presented. In a lot of the examples and the case studies that I'm going to present to you, in fact, the private sector aspect itself has been suppressed. In some cases, I would say that it's been obfuscated, and in some cases, it's subterfuge. So you have a private sector partner or a private sector player actively using all the resources of the state, all the power of the state to advance a particular interest. But that interest is wholly presented as national interest. And to the point where it is done without even regard for the private sector benefits that may be accruing. So we don't even acknowledge it. And that has created a very different situation on our hands. So I think that rather than state capture, the situation as it persists in Ghana, as it pertains in Ghana, is better described as state enchantment. We've been enchanted and into not even seeing it. And I will bet you, those of you in the hall are people of eminent standing in society. You have immense knowledge. But the way in which I'm going to frame these case studies will shock you. It will shock you primarily because you will disagree with the characterization, some of which will be due principally to the fact that you've never really paid attention to what has occurred over the last couple of years. And if that is indeed the case, then I will have succeeded in my task of portraying this as state enchantment. One of the elements, so there are key elements of state enchantment. One of them is, of course, the fact that the population, the citizenry, have been jujufied. You know, this state enchantment involves elements of juju. And this juju operates in such a manner in which private interest is presented to the public as universal aspirations of the citizens. There are elements in which the private and the public are so blurred that actually people do not see the distinction at all. And often they are not even aware of the private underpinnings of that state agenda. So the state agenda, and there's no doubt there's clear state agenda. What I'm saying is that whereas in the national military industrial complex context of the United States, whereas in the Dangote industrialization context of Nigeria, whereas in the Roche or Novartis context of Switzerland, people are very alert to what the private sector is contributing, and they may have ideological differences as to whether that is net positive or net negative. I'm arguing that in the case of Ghana, in the case of some African countries, it's presented in such a way that you're not even aware of the underlying private sector interest. I also say that sometimes you go to the extent where we have been so jujufied, we have been so enchanted that we look and we don't even see. So there's no point to subterfuge. If you actually did look, it will be very blatant and very obvious, but you don't even bother to look. So many sections of the population then become so wedded to the public and official narrative that activists or advocates like, you know, those of us at Imani that try to shine light on it are completely disregarded. We have absolutely no traction because people don't even understand what you are talking about, and you just don't have the time and the incentive to delve into it. And consistently, these national projects, which I argue are examples and actually high points of state enchantment, they are presented in the imagery of national success. As in, they become examples of how Ghana has truly thrived. So let's go on and then go through these case studies very quickly. As Ghana Card, a few of you who follow me on Twitter knows this is one of my pet projects, my pet subjects, and I've been talking about it a lot. And it is true that, before you came to this session, somebody had told you that one of the first examples that we are going to use to demonstrate and to illustrate the prevalence of state capture in the Ghanaian setting was Ghana Card. You've been completely mystified, perhaps even stupefied. So bear with me for a moment as I try to explain. Most people don't realize that the Ghana Card initiative is actually a public-private partnership. A few do, and those of you in this room, I presume, predominantly do, but in the general public, they think it's a Ghana government project alone. So it's a public-private initiative. The private sector component is known as IMS, and IMS more or less owns the technological infrastructure. They own the servers, they own the software, they have the licenses for the encryption and the cryptography. They own everything about the technology. And the government is responsible for the logistics. So NIA, the National Identification Authority, has offices, it has personnel, it has some cars, it hires some people temporarily, and then it rolls out this registration using technology provided to them by the private sector. What is interesting, though, is that the whole mechanism, the whole national identification mechanism, have been so designed that it's not possible for the NIA to print the card anywhere else except through this private operator. So the private partner is the only one who prints the cards. And so the government, so this is very different from most other places where you have national ID card producers and the like. Like if you go to Malaysia, the government owns the infrastructure. They may hire contractors to work on it, but it's the government that is the ultimate backstopper. It owns the IP, it owns the infrastructure, it controls the data. It also determines who prints the cards. And in the case of Malaysia, they will run a tender. and whichever company wins, the printing company that wins the tender, then gets access to the encrypted data and all of that configuration, a set of configurations in order to generate genuine ID cards. In Ghana, that's not the case. In Ghana, more or less, the country is bound to continue to receive the cards only from one vendor, which is the vendor that has entered into this long-term agreement with the government. Because it's the only vendor that can produce the card. If that company was to go bankrupt tomorrow, and of course we pray to God that that never happens, literally Ghana will not have a Ghana card again because of the fact that the licenses that subsist, that gives Ghana access to some of the high tech components of the system, some of the licenses for cryptography and the rest of it, all inhered within this company. This company has the licenses in its name. It's also the case that the PPP that was signed guarantees the consortium $1.2 billion over the life of the program. Essentially, the government committed that through this effort, we would generate $1.2 billion. Now, this is very unusual. You probably will never find another example anywhere in the world where something that is normally perceived as a public good, an identification card for citizens, also involve a guaranteed return, which must be made. So one of the reasons why consistently the government tries to force people to use the Ghana card is because they need the volumes. They need people to actually get the cards. Why? Because every time you get the card, the government pays money to the consortium. And because the government pays money to the consortium, it needs a lot of volume for it to make sense. Otherwise, they're not going to hit the $1.2 billion. The other thing that you also have to realize is that because they needed the volumes, they needed to assure these volumes. They literally sent laws into parliament forcing the country and the citizens in the country to use the national card for everything. You can't have a bank account without it. You can't register to, in fact, they even tried to prevent people from registering to vote if they didn't have the Ghana card and the Ghana card alone. And when you listen to the analysis, none of it makes sense in terms of why it should be only the Ghana card, because how you get the Ghana card is no more rigorous or stringent than how you get a passport or some other ID card. In fact, the majority of people who got a Ghana card use the guarantor system. Somebody shows up and says that this person is someone that I know, and that is the only basis for which they have the Ghana card. As for why that is superior to the passport, they don't have to explain it to you. Because as I've tried to explain, the reason why it's being driven is not primarily because the government is so keen on national security and the rest. Of course, that is a secondary benefit. But you must understand the rational motivation behind forcing you to use only the Ghana card. It got to the point where, as part of the strategy and having made laws to back it, the government then said you couldn't vote without having the Ghana card. And unfortunately for the government, it owed the contractor. It hadn't made some of the payments. Why? Because, as I said, the contractor had been guaranteed certain minimum income. And now that income is tied to estimations of how much it's likely to recoup from the sale of the cards. So it had delivered a number of cards, a couple of millions of cards to the government, and the government had not been able to pay the money because, the strategy was around a lot of the money being made by state entities paying to verify the card, but the card was not yet available. Many of the state entities were refusing to pay because they didn't have the money, they hadn't budgeted for it. And you remember that this company had budgeted to receive nearly $500 million from different state agencies verifying the card. And that was not, anywhere close to the reality on the ground. In fact, in some instances, because of competition among different private sector interests, the Ministry of Communications had prevented the use of the verification mechanism for the SIM card registration. So the ministry has said you can only use the Ghana card, which is of course national policy. But when it came to the verification, the Ministry of Communication had a preferred private sector vendor, another company, which was handling the systems for collecting the biometric. And to allow the Ghana card vendor to come in will have meant that that particular commercial relationship will be disrupted. So, in fact, all of these things had meant, therefore, that the money that was supposed to come was not coming as fast enough. And the government was then because the government had guaranteed, the government was then on the tab for paying these amounts. Unfortunately, the government had not paid. So when this matter then went to Parliament, luckily, the opposition in Parliament used the excuse of the fact that not enough people had the cards. And of course, the reason why not enough people had the cards was because the government owed the private contractor. And so a lot of the cards had been kept without being distributed. But you have to ask yourself the question, why did Parliament even tolerate the notion that without a card, you cannot register. When we've been doing this democracy for a long time, we know that in the end, the mechanism for identifying people through the guarantee system is the same that people are using to get a Ghana card. The reason, of course, is that the elites themselves have been enchanted. So when this matter came up, the only discussion was the finance ministry must find the money so that the cards will be released so people can go and register. Unfortunately, that did not happen in time for the district assembly elections. And I suppose the CI was then laid the law, which will have required that you only use the Ghana card to register to vote, had then had to be laid in Parliament without that provision. So my argument is that the way in which it is framed is such that even the opposition elite does not recognize what is going on, or even if it does, it's completely disabled. Yes. Yes, I have 2 more case studies, then we'll conclude. The second one is the digital addressing. And in the digital addressing also, the presentation that is made often to the public is that, this is purely national policy that is being implemented. And the national policy that is being implemented revolves around all the benefits that you've heard the national addressing will achieve for us in our economy. What was, of course, not obvious to people was that actually this was purely private initiative. Somebody had an app. The person was not able to get enough traction for the private app called Asante GPS. They managed to get the government to, baptize this app as the national digital addressing system. And then on top of that, give them a contract to do this rebranding at the cost of about $3.5 million. And then when it became very apparent that there was no clear strategy as to how you will get all these benefits that they have been promised in terms of formalization of the economy, the decision was made that it should be transferred to the Ghana Post, but without any receptacle at the Ghana Post to inherit it. What we now know is that the system is still completely controlled by the private company, and that private company is continuing to add profit-making elements to it, like ride-sharing, fintech, etc., which eventually will be launched as if it's a Ghana Post transformation exercise, but in actual fact, it's not a Ghana Post transformation exercise. We also know of the revenue assurance programs, where the revenue assurance benefits are presented to us as if it's purely a matter of the government plugging leakages, plugging leakages in revenue. And yet still, when you analyze it rationally, you come to the conclusion that the solutions don't work. And we can take the case of Kelly GVG, where the principle is that because the telecom companies lie about the volume of calls and the volume of megabytes of data download, the government does not get the revenue deserved because the revenue is tied to the volume of calls and the volume of megabytes of data downloaded. The truth, of course, is that to determine how much a telco has made and therefore the tax it must pay, it's not just the volume, it's also the rates. So what is 1 megabyte? What is a 1 minute or 1 second of a phone call? How much is it costing? And that costing process does not happen in the volumetric dimension. It does not happen by counting the number of calls. It happens in internal software generated by the company. And because the company can give discounts, they can decide to price differently in the evening and the morning. Knowing how many calls have passed through a system, knowing how much megabytes of data have been downloaded, does not actually tell you the revenue that is being generated at all. So technically and logically, any monitoring of phone calls purported to be able to help us with revenue assurance does not make sense. And yet we pay millions of dollars to Kelly GVG, now the custodian of the national common platform, which people assume to be a national system, but it's actually owned and managed by a private company. And this company makes all this money for absolutely no benefit to the state. They've never been able to move the revenue outing for CST, communication service tax, or anything else. And now we have this issue of SML, where once again we are being told that the likes of the big mining companies and the oil and gas companies are cheating Ghana. And the only way to solve that problem is to integrate some kind of technology using blockchain, X-ray, etc., to prevent them from cheating us. But the truth is that these companies typically are listed on the stock market, and they typically want to convey to that market and to their investors that their production volumes are massive. They have absolutely no benefit and incentive of lying about their production volumes. What they do when they want to cheat on taxes is to overestimate and to exaggerate their costs. By exaggerating their costs, they are able then to benefit from transfer price and other such mechanisms. And yet still this company is on course to make nearly $1 billion over the term of the contract. Last case study is the one regarding the tap and go, which has been presented to the country as an Oyster card for Ghana. And if you paid attention, yes, if you paid attention, you will have noticed that it was presented as a GPRTU project. And the comparison that was made was to the Oyster card in the United Kingdom. And yet still, it turns out that this has nothing to do whatsoever with the GPRTU. They don't own a cent of the company that actually runs it. All the infrastructure, all the intellectual property is held by a complete private company. The same group of companies that were behind projects like Hyperpay that was supposed to enable VIP, which is a private bus company, to be able to digitalize its ticketing operations. And yes, so this has been branded as a national project where we are more or less digitalizing mass transit in Ghana. In short, what has happened over the last couple of years in this country is that most of these aspects of state capture are not even evident to the public. And I bet that most of you sitting in the audience are not familiar with some of these points that I've made around who actually owns these grand national success stories. And I think because it's operated through a mechanism of enchantment, what I would call hypnosis, only a kind of counter-hypnosis will help us to address it. And what is the nature of that tool? I think civil societies have to be, civil society organizations have to be resourced, not necessarily to fight corruption directly, but to enhance overall accountability about government action and about government policy making and about government projects. Without that, my view is that tackling corruption head on, as far as state capture is concerned, will be completely futile and completely useless. Thank you very much.
The student said there was no state capture in Ghana. So there you are, Bright. But thanks so much for the very exciting conversation, especially the conversation where they get all of us hypnotized. Oftentimes it comes in the form of playing the citizens against actors like you. Oh, we don't have a job. This company is going to create jobs. See what they are doing. This is a Ghanaian company. We want to give business to outsiders, but we are not giving to Ghanaian companies. Even if it was rot, there's still this narrative about, okay, can't we have our own businesses do well? But I ask the question, if you have to do well, you should do well on very good footing and not in these very shady deals. Thank you for the very excellent, as you always do, provocation to a discussion. We will skip our musical interlude because of time. If you feel, some of us have been sitting for too long. If you need to stretch, you can stand a bit and then you sit. But I'm privileged now to introduce to you our next speaker, Professor Daniel Kaufman, who will be speaking to us. As we said, he has such a rich profile that I do not want to attempt to read it. But I have been a lecturer for close to 20 years, and I said that I used to read him even in my undergraduate days and in my master's days. So it tells you how way back he's been at this, and has written significantly on the issue of corruption globally. We're excited to have you to us on the state capture worldwide and what implications there are for us in Ghana. Thank you very much. Please put your hands together for Professor Daniel Kaufman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Justice. So, after all these enchanting presentations, I'm humbled, and I will try to go quickly through a presentation with quite a bit of data, letting the data speak, but with apologies in advance because I will go quicker than otherwise optimal for timing reasons, but I'm of course prepared for the sake of transparency of sharing everything afterwards, and we can discuss that also later in the interactive issue. While waiting for the presentation to be there, and I assume I have the clicker. Here I want to thank you, Dean Justice, for the invitation, for convening this event, but also I want to commend you and the partners, CDD-Ghana, Imane, Afrobarometer, and others. I think it's a real sign of hope because we hear a lot of talk and data and conversation about very dire challenges, which, by the way, they're not unique to Ghana, obviously, but sometimes we don't emphasize sufficiently the coalitions, the partnerships, and the avenues for real hope. So this is already a source of hope, and I want to complement in my remarks what already Mavis and Bright and Injustice have presented by presenting a broader framework in terms of governance, a broader framework by basically bringing governance into the picture. Okay, this is working. Oh, why don't I don't need the podium, actually. Okay. Yeah, I don't need the podium. I can, is it okay? Yeah, from here. So now it's all clear. I don't need the podium if I can walk around. And we get started because what I want to do relatively quickly, but through quite a bit of material, it's talking about the broader notion of governance, which I think it's really important in bringing some context into what we talk about when we talk about corruption, what we talk about when we talk about rule of law, when we talk about capture, and so on. So it helps as an organizing, simple, basic conceptual framework. What are the links of governance then to corruption, rule of law? Can we measure it? And we will make some suggestions. Already we heard about some measures at a specific level, Afrobarometer and so on. I'll bring some worldwide perspective, regional, country trends. So also, and the time and space over time and over space will be very important to make and try to draw some insights about Ghana and about the region. Some evidence on the causes and consequences of poor governance, of corruption, or as opposed when there is better governance and corruption. And then within that framework, we'll bring up again the issue of state capture, which, as eloquently presented by Bright, it has a long history already. We started our work over 25 years ago, and there have been very important evolutions, and many countries also have evolved. And I will suggest also and present initial data on a new index for the whole world on state capture. And essentially, much of the message is by letting the data talk is and being so involved on empirical work through decades is basically the importance of data power, of measuring for action, for policy reform, for changes that are needed, and we'll draw some implications at the end. So without further ado, what do we talk about when we talk about governance? Because as mentioned in the previous conversation, it's very common to write a lot about certain terms that we don't always know where they come from, and we don't define them. And we're not very clear or rigorous about definitions. So already with a partner I have worked, we're still at the World Bank for over 25 years, and that's our cray. We started thinking hard on that, looking at the literature a long time ago, and thinking about creating indicators, which eventually became the worldwide governance indicators that we do. And we just very basically proposed a definition of governance as a set of institutions and norms by which authority in a country is exercised. Now that's very simple, very basic, but very brief. So it's really important to unpack this, unbundle. So specifically, we unbundle it into 3 key clusters of governance. Each one of those clusters then we translate it into 2 measurable indicators for which we propose how to measure it. The first cluster is a political dimension of governance, essentially the process by which those in authority are selected, are monitored, and are replaced. And the 2 measurable dimensions are then for which we created basically an approach of how to measure it by collecting data from the world and applying a particular methodology. The first such indicator is the extent to which a country has or doesn't have voice for the citizenry and democratic accountability. The second, which is very different political dimension, is the extent to which a country enjoys or doesn't political stability and absence of major violence and terror. Then the second key dimension of governance is the economic dimension of governance, which essentially refers to the capacity of government to formulate and implement policies and provide public goods to the citizenry. And again, the 2 indicators for which we unpack that economic dimension of governance is the extent to which there is effectiveness of the government, of the bureaucracy, of the government, of the public institution in their functioning. And the second indicator, which is a very important but different function of government, is the quality of the regulatory framework, the regulations. So the provision of services is the government effectiveness, and the other is how is the regulatory framework provided by the government. And the third, last but not least, dimension is the institutional dimension, or institutional respect dimension, which is the respect of citizens and state for the institutions that govern interactions among them. Again, the 2 measurable indicators that we created is one is extent to which there is an application, an effective application of rule of law in the country. We're not talking about what laws are in the books, because many countries have good laws in the books. Are they implemented? Are they applied? And last but not least is control of corruption, which we're all talking about here, and we know what that is. Two quick implications that come out from presenting this basic, broader framework. One is that it clarifies this popular notion that exists sometimes, that when we talk about corruption, we're also talking about being more or less the same than poor governance, and being more or less the same as being the absence of rule of law. No, I mean they're linked, but they are separate notions, and governance is a broader umbrella issue which has different components. Second, and related, if we are serious about addressing the issue of control of corruption, the issue of corruption, by control of corruption, there is no escape but studying and looking at the other dimensions of governance. Because at the end of the day, corruption is very often a symptom of more fundamental institutional failures in other aspects. So then we would have to study and ask, well, is there a voice and democratic accountability in a country? Can civil society basically hold government into account? Is there transparency? Is there political stability? How are the regulations and so on? So by just putting forth the framework, it puts a bit in context the issue of corruption. We very briefly, basically everything is in the web, so I will skip through some of the details, but we started the measures since the mid-90s, and it's annual. It's for over 200 countries. And we use about 30 different data sources from around the world. We the providers of this methodology and putting together this index make absolutely no assessment ourselves about any country. It's very important to have a complete wall between the analysts and so on, and basically those that do the work at the country level and so on. So we basically base it on existing sources from around the world. It's all in the website here. And it's a long-standing research project, and there are many writings, and I see that have been mentioned here on the Governance Matter series that explain the methodology and so on. This is basically to say, trust me, these are the 30 sources and so on, but they come from very diverse types of sources, from country surveys of firms, from individuals, from including the Afrobarometer, which is an excellent source. There is also for other regions, like Latinobarometer and so on, my region. Then it comes from expert assessment from commercial risk rating agencies, Economist Intelligence Unit, and many others. Experts assessment from NGOs, from think tanks, Reporters Without Borders and others, and expert assessment from governments and multilaterals. These sources and their headquarters and where they come, they are from throughout the world. Like Afrobarometer, it's basically all started here in CDD-Ghana. So many sources come basically from the countries themselves. And obviously the respondents, individuals and firms and so on, come from the countries themselves. So it's not particularly north or south, or doesn't have that type of bias. This is just to show, again, the results come out. 200 countries don't fit in one graph, so I put about 70 in a descending order in terms of control of corruption. And it's just to show that we have to be when we do this work, we have to be very rigorous and serious and transparent and precise about the degree of imprecision in every one of these data. And you did mention before the margin of error. We take that very seriously already for 25 years. And the margin of error is shown atop each one of the columns by the very, very thin line. The sobering news is that it doesn't make any sense to pretend that we're running the horse races and that Finland beat Denmark by a nose or vice versa, because they are all, what we call in statistics, they are statistical tie. They're next to each other. But the good news is that, as you also mentioned for Afrobarometer, this margin of error is not fatally large, and therefore it can be very useful as long as we're conscious of not over-interpreting the results when there are small changes or small differences. So these 6 groups of different colors, the greens, are very different than the yellow group. The yellow are very different than the different red groups. They're in completely different categories statistically from a rigorous standpoint. The same applies over time. Very quickly, one of the indicators, voice and democratic accountability in a world map fashion. If it looks to some of you as if this was just copied and pasted from the web, it was. It's all in our website, so I'm not going to go through the detail, but basically the darker this bluish color it is, in this case, it means that the better is voice and democratic accountability, and the lighter it is, the more challenges is the work. Already you may be seeing something that I'm about to emphasize. And we see it for control of corruption, it's similar but not the same. But if we go to a region, and I'll take first my own region, being a Chilean, having born and grown up there. If we take the whole Latin American region, including Central America and so on, what we see is enormous variation. So this whole notion and tendency among many organizations of generalizing about a region, one has to be very, very careful about. Of course, I'm not totally unbiased given my my origins, but I have nothing to do. This is the data, how it comes out and comes from the outside. And if we see the thin country on very long and thin in the south, so that's Chile, very dark. And then we see at the top of South America, very, very light, is Venezuela. And there's a whole spectrum in between. And why I mention that is because sometimes there is a sense that each region is just so different or criticized more or less. It's not that different than if we start looking also at Africa with significant variation in that. This is for control of corruption, and I included also, one can zoom in the web and you can do whichever map you want. And I show also the part of the Middle East in that context. And one can zoom even further, of course. Many of you will be interested in the West African region and where Ghana is compared with others. Even within the sub-region, there is very significant variation. But then many of us are very interested to go more in depth within a country, like you have done and many others do, and also see the trends over time. This is, I choose an emblematic case of failure, and I'll say why in a second, which is Venezuela, because there is this notion that institutions don't change very quickly and so on. Well, certainly they can go south, they can go really bad very, very quickly. The top bar for each indicator, and I have the 6 indicators, each one is being shown in a different color. Yellow at the top for voice and accountability, and at the bottom the 6 is control of corruption. From 2000 to 2022, at the top bar in each case is the earliest period. Look how it basically implodes everything in 2 decades. Complete implosion. In fact, it happened even quicker. So, very sobering. But then there are mirror images too. This is the neighboring country, Colombia. Same Spanish colonial heritage, historical antecedent, culturally Spanish, we all speak Spanish, and so on. The other direction. Not as sharp and as marked, but showing the art of the possible, that you can. And a country that for 30, 40 years was in civil war internally, now also significant improvements on that because of the peace that has been obtained already a few years ago. Then, this is within the same region, almost a model case. The best now indicators even have surpassed Chile in most dimensions in Latin America is Uruguay. This is Uruguay. It's an unsung success, a case study that we don't talk enough, but just to show also the art of the possible, another emerging economy. Then the most important country in America and probably in the world is the United States. Interestingly, it's not far from perfect, not a model and not going in the right direction, as we know. In fact, if we're going to talk about models, Denmark is much closer to that. So that's keeping in mind that just being a powerful country doesn't mean that you are the model to the world. Now, this is Ghana, going to the governance indicators, and I will let the Ghanaian experts, which are all up here and everywhere, interpret whether you prefer to suggest that the glass is half full or it's half empty. But what I wanted to emphasize in the context of worldwide, that because this is relative to the rest, Ghana, it's in the middle. Ghana is not at the bottom, which sometimes one gets the impression by the narratives and by the newspapers and so on. Of course, you you may say, well, but we should and we can aspire to much more, number one. And number two, the direction of travel or the trend may not be in the right direction, and that would be a concern. And that's what you showed with the Afrobarometer before. So definitely on control of corruption, there were better days in the mid-2000s and so on, according to the data. But at the same time, Ghana has made some strides on voice and accountability, at least until 2017. So looking at the broader perspective, and there are some areas of strength, like on sort of political stability and so on. So it's worth reflecting, but of course there have been also some deteriorations, like in regulatory equality and so on. But I think it's very important, even if it's boring for journalism, for the press, to get into the details and have the fuller picture in terms of different governance indicators. This is also, to just make the point, this is a regional comparison of the 6 indicators for each region for the last period, for the data until 2022. And of course, Sub-Saharan Africa is not where it could be, and it should be, but it's not the worst in the world either, and particularly in some dimensions, certainly on voice and accountability. The former Soviet bloc and the Middle East and so on is significantly worse than Sub-Saharan Africa. And while on other areas, the Middle East may be better and so on, but there are about 4 regions that have very significant and dire challenges, so they should not be a particularly. And Latin America has its own problems. In fact, Central and Eastern Europe, the new Europe, surpassed Latin America over the past 10, 15 years. So the challenges exist everywhere in every region. So now, governance and corruption can be measured. But so what? What do we do with those measures? So I'll just suggest very, very quickly, that's part of the research also we have done. Does it matter? It matters enormously. So in very brief, we found, with all the data around the world, and it's an average finding, of course, that if a country improves its governance, let's say on control of corruption, or its rule of law, in a significant fashion, but realistic. Realistic means one standard deviation out of the whole spectrum, which is 5. So just 20% better improvement from what's feasible over 2, 3, 4 years, let's say. There is such a push and reform. In the long term, it will take a while, but in the long term, it increases its per capita income 3 times. That's the 3-fold development dividend, what we call about, from $10,000 per year per capita per year to 30,000, or from 20 to 60, and so on. The same type of payoff is by an improvement in governance in terms of reduction of infant mortality, better health, and better education outcomes, and increased investments. We and others have found that also significant improvement in global competitiveness. This is what I am showing is how it relates to the World Economic Forum Global Competitive Index very, very closely. A country that has more corruption will suffer significantly in terms of competitiveness and investments. And also it will suffer in the financial market by having to pay to mobilize internal finances to sovereign bonds. It will have to pay much more. It could be up to 1,000 basis points more. The difference between what Chile has to pay, which is about 200 points above LIBOR, and Egypt is 1,200. It could be enormous, and that's a governance better. The same with fiscal deficits, could be a major improvement. In terms of determinants of corruption, we have learned a lot too. I'll be very brief because I want to get to the state capture part before concluding. But obviously, voice and democratic accountability is crucial for addressing corruption, as well as transparency, press freedom, has been found to be absolutely critical too, and a number of other areas too. The issue of natural resources is very, very important and tricky. Unfortunately, on average, for all resource-rich countries, they have much lower governance levels. The quality of governance, the quality of control of corruption and rule of law tends to be lower because of what's so-called the course of natural resources, but it's not a deterministic course because some countries have basically defied that course and made improvements, but the majority, as we see by that average, has lower standards of governance than non-resource-rich countries, even at the same level of income. Not only that, but over time, they have not improved in governance, while non-resource-rich countries have improved. So it imposes even a larger challenge and harder work of countries that all of a sudden find oil and so on, but there are initiatives, and I've been associated, for instance, with the Extractive Interest Transparency Initiative, which has a very vibrant membership and chapter of Ghana here, as well as there are issues, there are also international initiatives for addressing illicit financial flows, which probably our colleagues in the panel will address too, and other such international initiatives. Now, on state capture, and since Bright already gave such an eloquent talk, I'll be very quick and brief. But basically, I think it's really important to make the distinction between what the traditional notions of corruption were and how we challenged it already quite some time ago. The traditional notion of corruption, which referred to administrative and bureaucratic corruption, the bribery, and so on, were focused and took place in the implementation of the existing rules of the game in a country. By contrast, we suggested that state capture takes place in an insidious fashion in shaping those rules of the game in the first place, altering the institutions, the rules of the game, the whole procurement system, the systems for the benefit of the few, by the economic and political influential. So instead of the focus always in the past of some corrupt middle-level servant that may have received a bribe or received many bribes, the focus becomes on the powerful captor, which is often a private corporate, but as was mentioned before, it can be very much colluding with a high-level politician or state leader. And some of the case studies maybe that Bright presented can be seen in that faction. So these captors are the shapers of the laws and regulatory regimes. They don't take them as a given. They shape them and distort them from the group. And it takes place particularly where there is enormous inequality of influence. And one very key distinction is that it can be legal. A lot of the state capture takes place within a legal framework. Why? Because the captors have also managed to shape the laws and so on for their benefit. And that's why we coined also a notion, and we have papers on the notion of legal corruption. So that suggested at the time a redefinition of also even as an alternative to the traditional definition of corruption, which is the abuse of public office for private gain, to such, what about if we also focus on the privatization of rulemaking or the privatization of policy or policy making, which that privatization could be taking place by a state leader also for his own benefit in some cases. And it was already shown that we started measuring for transition economies in the post-Soviet era, so that's 25 years. So I'll spend 2 minutes only, and then I'll conclude on this new index we're working on, which is State Capture Index with data from different sources from around the world. I'm not going to go through the methodology, but to suggest that in a similar fashion to to the known governance indicators. I'm trying to cover most of the world. We have data for about 170 plus countries, and also a picture like this emerges. But interestingly, when we compare the measure of control of corruption from the governance indicator, the old measure, with a measure of state capture, some differences emerge. And one is that for high-income countries, they're a bit more captured than they are corrupt in the traditional world. So the well-known measures of corruption, well, including in the governance indicator, but also Transparency International and others, maybe underestimated the extent of the broader misgovernance issue, because much of what happens in the more sophisticated industrialized countries is legal, and it takes somewhat different forms. So that's one of the changes. Just to show 2-3 slides before concluding on the data over time of state capture. It's very interesting to see that when in the 25 years ago, late 90s, United States was more or less at the level of Uruguay in a measure of corruption, relatively low. Over time, the red line, you see, the US increases with a sharp increase during the Trump presidency, and over the past couple of years, a slight improvement, and so on. So much so that it surpassed Chile, which has middle levels, but Uruguay rating so much better than the United States. So there can be some interesting and surprising results in that context. Of course, at a much higher level of state capture, if we look at other parts of the world, Russia is emblematic. And Russia is emblematic related to what Brad Simmons was presenting, of also a shift in the basic form of state capture. You see, just to put it very simply, state capture in the old days, the way we thought about it, was mostly capture of the state by the oligarchs, by the big corporates. But over time, it has expanded and it has evolved to consider the possibility of capture by the state leaders, state politicians, and so on. And in between is collusion, right? Between the two. Russia has gone from the regime of the oligarchic capture, is capture of the state by the oligarch, to exactly the extreme opposite, by the capture by one state leader that we don't need to elaborate much further. Ukraine starts like Russia, post-Soviet and so on, very similar, but has made improvements. But Turkey and Hungary are going the way that Russia is going. And finally, just very quickly to show some trends in the African continent. One of the interesting things about all this, which we showed it also for governance indicator, but it shows up here again, is that there can be reversals of fortune. There can be some countries that have upward trends, downward trends. In this case, whatever goes up means more state capture. Of course, Cameroon is at the top, and also Nigeria is very high. Angola is very interesting, having been very much at the top, but in recent years improvement, and then there are very significant improvements in countries like Gambia, while Botswana, Cape Verde, Seychelles do better. And Ghana is not, according to this data, very highly captured yet, but the trend is going upward direction, and that's going to be part of the final thoughts in the concluding reflections in a second, which is first at the very basic level from what I just presented. Governance, yes, can be measured and measured over time, over space, and it matters. It matters enormously for inclusive development, for financial stability, security, democracy, justice, and fighting corruption. It's related. And that's related to the notion that one cannot fight corruption by fighting corruption. It's not just a question of creating a commission or starting another campaign. It's systemic. So there has to be voice and accountability, transparency. Public finance reforms, public sector reform, political finance is crucial. Addressing impunity is absolutely critical, a major challenge, but the experts are going to talk soon here on this issue. I'm sure they know much more. Strengthening the rule of law, increasing the cost of corruption is critical. And beyond traditional corruption, state capture is an absolutely key challenge. And the reason it's very important to the glass half empty and half full is first to say, look, maybe the country where I am is not at the bottom. But if one waits too long, it's much, much harder than once a country is much more fully captured. It's very crucial. So the question of preventing a complete descent to a fuller state capture in many settings, it should be a challenge. And for that, data is very important. I mean, we're not that bad, but we're going in the wrong direction, and the point of intervention is early rather than later. This is exactly like in public health and so on. So the notion of prevention in this case becomes very important, and early action. Data and analysis, the power of data is crucial for those flags, for those early flags and early action. But so is innovation, and at the end of the day, a lot of audacity in terms of reverting this by the champions of reform that say, look, we're going in the wrong direction, and we need then to have bold action to avert getting into more trouble. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I wish we were staying here for the whole day, but forgive us. But I'm sure that as you listen, there were moments that you were hopeful or happy, other moments that you felt depressed. And I find your presentation fits so well into the conversation with Bright, especially on the issue of co-creation of rules to fit, or as it were, to create space for state capture. And we can see corruption entrepreneurs would often not just let go. They are going to be involved in all places, including influencing state officials and parliaments into passing laws that they will become advocates of later and probably start benefiting from it. Ghana not there yet, but rising and rising. It's concerning. Thank you, Daniel, for the insightful lecture. Let me acknowledge, and I know that there are partner representatives here. You know that this is put together, this event is put together by CDD-Ghana with partners with us, University of Ghana Business School, Ghana Integrity Initiative, the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, Imani Ghana, Africa Center for Energy Policy, ASEP, and Graduate Students Association, the Legon branch. As I said, I know that there are reps of these institutions here. Thank you very much for joining hands to discuss this. This is being recorded. Don't feel depressed about the number of people here. It's being recorded, it's being streamed live, and so this is going to be available for many more views online. Now let me bring it home. The English people like to talk about football coming home. Let's bring it home into the backyard of the people who have the responsibility to chase the bad guys. We are happy now to receive Mr. Kisia Jabin, as I said, a lawyer and law lecturer. He was with us here at the School of Law until he was asked to take up this Herculean task. He's been at it. I've listened to him sometimes. He gets depressed, but that is the nature of the game. Somebody must fight it. And so whilst you do it in the mainstream, know that you have many, many supporters. And the people who support you, as they say it, the Bible says it, those that are with you are more than those that are with them. Let's listen to Mr. Kisi Ejabin, the special prosecutor.
Good afternoon to all of us. I'm going to save time. I notice their tired faces. In April 2023, I observed that the pervasive issues of state capture and corruption represent a collective pandemic in our region. So the need to revisit this topic only tells me that our progress has been slow, if not delayed, in our quest to achieve a decent existence for ourselves through accountability and good governance. I have been asked to comment on efforts and challenges of a state agency in the fight against corruption. My focus is on the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Our efforts are discussed in our various half-yearly reports available on the website of the office. So today, permit me to highlight a stiff challenge to the OSP in the fight against corruption. In the past 25 years or so, the fight against corruption has engaged global attention on almost the same scale as the human rights drive which preceded it. From the applaudable efforts of Transparency International, which took it upon itself to fight global corruption, through the augmentation of the fight by international organizations, notably the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC. Further, through the adoption of national policies, laws, and regulations by states, to the involvement of civil society and corporate bodies, the fight against corruption is presently the universal bride. However, the fight against corruption is proving to be an unruly bride indeed. She is not lending herself to agreeable domestication and cohabitation. Several studies and publications, which need not detain us here, have concluded that not much success has been recorded globally in the fight against corruption. Much energy and scholarship have been expended on the challenges confronting the fight against corruption. I have no intention of boring you with an enumeration of these well-known and oft-lamented difficulties. We know them all so well, and they play out so debilitatingly in the politics of anti-corruption. We owe a disconsolate tribute to the challenges as the reason for the unhappy global state of the fight against corruption and the account of the rather sorry score sheet. In Ghana, after decades of contemplation and experimentation, we created the Office of the Special Prosecutor, the OSP, as the flagship anti-corruption institution with a unique fourfold mandate of investigating corruption and corruption-related cases, prosecuting suspected offenders, recovering and managing assets, and taking steps to prevent corruption. So elegant it seems on paper, so joyful it sounds to the ears of the anti-corruption campaigner. However, beyond the seeming good feeling, graveness stirs. In addition to the well-known challenges affronting the fight against corruption, the OSP faces a formidable existential challenge. Its very essence and existence is hemmed so tightly as if in a vice to scuttle it. It should perhaps not be surprising as its creation itself was greeted with immense skepticism, and it was attended by argument against argument as to why it was needed at all. Will it not be a duplication? Will it be allowed to function properly? Do we even need it? The questions poured. In fairness, the questions themselves were not altogether problematic. After all, we must carefully examine the utility for the creation of an institution. However, the result was the creation of an institution with never-before-seen powers and mandates, yet with a plethora of half-hearted provisions in the enactments, which appear to render its operation a glimmer on the horizon. Along come the death knells. Not infrequently, we hear calls, a lot of the time from very high places, that the OSP should be scrapped, and that it serves no useful purpose. On another score, there have been and there are attempts to discredit the office and its principal officers unfairly and unjustly, alongside formidable resistance and pushback. A careful examination of the reasons for the calls to do away with the OSP suggests that they are made without reference to the actual performance of the office in its 6 years of existence, and that the calls are born mainly of the teething challenges confronting the establishment of the office. Yet it bears reflecting that the creation and establishment of every institution come with the like circumstances of the pangs of childbirth and the raw emotion and anxiety of raising a child. These are natural. And the ordinary circumstances of mankind dictate that we must dutifully care for and nurture this 6-year-old child, which is the OSP, and not kill it. With forbearance, let us mark her growth and development. Condemnation at this stage is wholly unwholesome. Then again, an objective evaluation of the attempts to unfairly and unjustly discredit the office and its principal officers and the resistance and pushback against its operations suggests the evidence of the negativity associated with the human condition, born of the sense of self-preservation. That is to say, these attempts are merely a reaction against the office and its officers, depending on whether a person and his associates are at the short end of an investigation carried out by the office. The human condition is such that no one happily accedes to indictment. No one welcomes investigations. No one wants to be called out as suspected of engaging in corruption and corruption-related activities. And so, there is a strong pushback intended at deflecting the focus of scrutiny. The effect of the existential challenge confronting the OSP is that though the nation collectively acknowledges that we must fight corruption, yet there is also a scepter that the flagship agency designed, even if imperfectly, to fight corruption is not needed and should be disbanded, while others actively undermine it and its principal officers. This has translated into a rather curious cycle. The outburst of an outcry where the OSP acts, and an outcry where it's seen as not acting. It is as if we do not know what we want. It seems to me that the situation in Ghana now is emboldened this one. We must fight corruption, but we must not fight it. I repeat again. The situation in Ghana now, from our scorecard, is this. We must fight corruption, but we must not fight it. From where I sit as a special prosecutor, I see the foresightful wisdom in the creation of the Office of the Special Prosecutor as a specialized, autonomous, investigative, and prosecutorial agency to fight corruption. I have asked the following question several times, and I will keep asking for as long as it takes. And this is it. Are we ready to fight corruption? And to this, I add, are we ready to allow the OSP to fight corruption? While leadership often shoulders the blame for corruption, citizens play a significant role in the problem. What a society abhors does not easily persist. Therefore, I further inquire, do we genuinely detest corruption? Or have we accepted this as part of our culture? Let us all reflect on that. Thank you.
Do we genuinely detest corruption? Maybe, Mr. OSP, let me turn it the other around. Do I genuinely detest corruption? Because I think in the end, that's where it boils down to. Do we genuinely? But the other part of it, Mr. OSP, or we have accepted it as part of our culture. It's one of the topics that I treat in my ethics class, where I have always sought and provided evidence to justify that if anybody wanted to be corrupt, let them be. Do not bring our culture in. Because everywhere from Axim to Zabzugu, all of our cultures as a people, either in Ghana or in the entirety of the black race, there are culturally inbuilt mechanisms that not only detest, but actually vomit out corruption. And I have provided evidences. How many of us, if you heard that there was a bad neighbor, even accepted our children to eat from his house? How many of us did not get old women who we gave a gift to come to us to try and find out what they did to deserve that gift? How many of us did not see our people take somebody who has broken taboos, sent out of the town, banished out of the town, or in some extreme cases, even stoned? Didn't we have these? How many of us accepted a thief or a rapist in our families? No. Our culture has never stood for this. So, if anybody is on the path of corruption, please be on it and keep going. But do not bring in our culture. And I hear people say, if I refuse a gift, if they gave you a gift and you refuse it, it was against culture. Please, you are corrupt. Don't bring our culture in. Thank you, Mr. OSP. The fight has to be fought. Someone must lead it. Keep going. As long as you have life, as I say, those that are with you are more than those that are with them. But it will touch everyone. It will touch everyone. I just gave you at the beginning 4 family members have perished for lack of hospital facilities. Put your hands together again for the OSP. Thank you very much for sharing the challenges. We will now move on to YOKO, and we will take the executive director of YOKO, Mamiya Tiwa. What's the other name? I forgot it. Adudankwa. And I'm sure that you have gotten a lot of trouble from the Adudankwa name, right?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And a very special good afternoon to my brother, the OSP, Mr. Kisia Jaben, also known as Ankwanoma. OSP, also known as the Ankwanoma. And thank you for passing the baton to YOKO. I am delighted and honored by the invitation extended to me or to the Office of the Economic and Organized Crime Office to share our thoughts on efforts and challenges of state agencies in the fight against corruption. Permit me to borrow the words of our guest speaker, Dr. Daniel Kaufman. In an interview that he granted and that is posted on YouTube, he said, "You don't fight corruption by fighting corruption." And this afternoon, he has also repeated it. I believe this quote was born out of the frustrations that most middle-income countries in Africa and Asia go through when they commit to the fight against graft and corruption by fighting corruption in the most conventional ways and by creating additional layers of anti-corruption agencies and commissions in fighting the canker which continuously eat away the fortunes of most African countries. Available information indicates that corruption costs the world nearly $3 trillion a year. And in Ghana here, according to Deputy Commissioner of SRAC, Mr. Richard Kwesi, in 2018, and you can find it online, he said, corruption costs Ghana about $3 billion US, and it amounts to almost the same as 300% of all aids received during the period. The Economic and Organized Crime Office is a state institution, and I am so privileged to be its executive director, that has been mandated to investigate financial and organized crime which the state has financial interest, and prosecute on the authority of the Attorney General. Until the enactment of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, Act 2017, Act 959, YOKO had a mandate to investigate corruption and bribery. The passing of the OSP Act, which amended a part of YOKO's Act, has changed the narrative. In spite of that, YOKO works together with other public anti-corruption agencies and such bodies as the Office of the Special Prosecutor, the Audit Service, the Commissioner for Human Rights and Administrative Justice, the Internal Audit Agency, Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, the Ghana Police Service, and other anti-corruption advocacy groups like the CDD, the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, and Ghana Integrity Initiative in the fight against corruption. Let me say that over the years, efforts of these anti-corruption institutions or agencies, either individually or collectively, the impacts on the fight against corruption have not been interrogated. This means that as a state, do we know how we have fed, either individually or collectively, the efforts of these institutions? That is why this afternoon I'm happy that probably this has the potential to hold these institutions accountable in the fight against corruption. From an institutional perspective, corruption arises when public officials have wide authority, little accountability, and perverse incentives. This means the more activities public officials control or regulate, the more opportunities exist for corruption. Furthermore, the lower the probability of detection and punishment, the greater the risk that corruption will take place. So this afternoon, I'm here to talk about the efforts and the challenges that state institutions are faced in the fight against corruption. So I don't know whether I should talk about the challenges first or the efforts first. But what are some of the efforts that we have put in place? And I will talk in respect of the Economic and Organized Crime Office. When it comes to institutional collaboration, let me also say that you fight corruption by first identifying what is it. And I agree with Professor Stephen Adair when he said corruption fighting is about the law and leadership. And by leadership, I'm not talking about the leadership at the top. I'm talking about leadership at every sphere of institution, from the level, and let me use my own institution, the Ghana Police Service, that is my banner institution as an example. Fighting it from the station, from the district, from division, the region, the national. So if you are a leader at any of this level, you need to identify your vulnerabilities. What are the things that is causing corruption so that you can specifically deal with it? So all the efforts that you have to put in place must be smart. You need to specifically identify what the issue is, and then you have to measure it. How are you going to deal with it? And whatever that you want to put in place must be achievable, and it must be measurable, and it should be within specified time frame. I sat down and I listened to the various presenters talking about percentages, this one is this one is that, and I asked my very good brother, what is in this for us? All these researches that we have received over the years, is there a way that we can look at it and say, from last year or from 2022, these are the things that we have done, and these are the results? Do we have any data? So you hear corruption costs us about 3 billion. What is it? What are the details? Which organization? At what level? What do we have to do to solve it? Otherwise, year on, we keep on coming out with similar data, and then we'll continue to listen to them, and we continue to be talking about corruption without talking about corruption. And to borrow my brother, special prosecutor, are we really interested in fighting corruption? So the efforts, internal controls, we work with the internal audit agencies. And if you observe, quite recently, most of institutions have internal audit units, enhanced internal audit unit. And with the support of the internal audit agency, there are a lot of trainings looking at the emerging trends, and then we look at how we can collaborate together to fight corruption. And corruption doesn't stand alone. There's nobody who say, I'm standing here and I'm committing corruption. Corruption comes as a result of us either a service delivery, suppliers, procurement, payroll, whatever that it is. So if you want to fight it within this, any establishment, you need to identify what is it. We should stop using a wholesale package for everything. Because I have personally realized that there are certain things that you can use, some internal control measures that you can use for an office in Accra. It might not work in Takoradi. It might not work in Tamale. So you need to identify specifically what is wrong, your vulnerabilities. What is it that is causing this? So that at the end of the day, you can come out with specific specific tool to solve whatever that you have identified, and that is how you fight it. Otherwise, you'll be looking at researches and other things without necessarily fighting anything. Then, when you look at other efforts, we also work with international bodies. Last year, we signed MOU with the Economic and Financial Crime Commission in Nigeria, and I'm happy I have the GIZ officers here by their kind courtesy that they supported us to go to Nigeria to look at what they do. So you compare notes and you look at what they are doing that you are not doing. In as much as we learn from them, they also learn from us. And at the end of the day, we have a lot of things in common. So those that they have done well in the fight against corruption, we learn from them, they also learn from us. In addition, we also sponsored by the British High Commission to go to National Crime Agency in UK to look at what they do. And one thing that we came out with was that they have decided to be victim focused. They've realized that one of the difficult things that you do is to gather evidence when it comes to corruption and other financial crime cases. So they decided that why don't you do things that will rather prevent the issue from happening in the first place. So they call it the victim focus. We came back and we realized that we also need to do something similar. What did we do? What effort did we do? Last year, in collaboration with the Institute of Chartered Accountants, we organized training for our officers on financial forensic investigation, where our officers were taken through data analysis, financial investigation, and financial data analysis, so that they are able to come out with credible evidence to be able to present you to a judge who will say that, yes, you are saying somebody has committed an offense, and this is what you are supporting with it. We've signed MOU with other state institutions in our effort to fight financial crime and its related activities. We've done a lot of awareness creation. We've gone to schools because most of these school, the students, especially the second cycle, they know corruption, they've heard about corruption. But in actual fact, they don't really understand and appreciate what is it that is expected of them, even as students. So these are the things that we've been able to do that, and I'm still looking at my time. When it comes to challenges, YOKO as a state institution, subvented by the state, is faced with the normal routine challenges faced by all other institutions, and I'm not going to bore you with that. But specifically, when it comes to what we do, evidence gathering is one of the challenges that we face. You have a lot of people making wild allegations, but when it comes to supporting the allegation with evidence, you won't even hear from them again. But the point is that it's not about because you say something. And it is not about how many media houses are carrying on that allegation. It is about your ability to put credible evidence together that will be presented to a judge for prosecution. And remember, the judges are not listening to whatever that is being said in the social media. So when you have a case where the person has been tried, convicted in the court of public opinion, and at the end of the day, you are unable to gather the kind of evidence that will happen at the court, then the public will say that no, the institution is either not working well or there's something wrong with it. Because like any other crime, you need evidence to prosecute. It's not because you say it, it's not about the truth, it's about your ability to gather information to do that. So YOKO as another institution, we also need to look at what is it that we do that the YOKO itself will not be corrupted in terms of cases management, talking to suspects and other things. And again, GIZ supported YOKO to put up electronic case management system for transparency, accountability, and good supervision. So I sit in my office and a press of a button, I'm able to know what Tamale office is doing. I can give instruction to Tamale office. The head of legal can also have access to the same thing. And at the end of the day, when people see or they know that somebody else is watching whatever they are doing, it helps in the accountability and then the transparency process. What else? The challenge that we also face. Legislative thing. YOKO's Act was passed in 2010. And there are some of the issues that are no longer viable for us. So we are coming out with a new act. It's a bill. It is in a bill stage where the previous one didn't even have cryptocurrency in it. Now the new act is coming out with other issues that have come up after the act was passed. And these are issues that we are all putting together to ensure that in fighting corruption, what the act mandates us to do is something that the new act, when it is passed, will be able to address some of these issues. Then you have political will and then the logistics, the political will. Fortunately, sometimes when I hear people say, I'm handling a case and I have powers from the above directing me. Fortunately for me, I've not had that. Because you are guided by the law. Nobody will direct you when you have evidence. It is when you don't have evidence, you haven't been able to put evidence together. That is when somebody will tell you don't do this. But if you have done your work in such a way that you have evidence, very solid evidence, you just have to explain to the person, these are my evidence, these are the things I have A, B, C, and it is solid and I'm presenting it to the court. Nobody can stop you. But if we hide behind powers from above, then we are put aback and we disappoint the citizen, that they've given you a mandate to do that and you sit down and you be complaining about powers from above. The powers from above is the same power that gave you the power. And I don't think that power will take it from you. So let's do our work well. Let's try and make sure that if it is about evidence gathering, We need to follow the rules, we need to follow the procedures, so that at the end of the day, technical issues will not hurt our cases, and that whatever that we present to the court will be something that will be solid to convince any judge. Because the standard, whether it is corruption case, whether it is whatever it is also a crime. And it is the same proving beyond reasonable doubt. That is the standard. So you cannot say, because this is corruption case, you are not going to gather your evidence in such a way that that will be convincing for successful prosecution. Another important thing that we need to also look at, and it is a challenge, is systems. System that we have to put in place. Like I said earlier, corruption doesn't stand alone. It comes because of something. How do we put in place that something so that at the end of the day, whether it is through procurement, through whatever that we do, service delivery or other thing, nobody can go beyond it, and it can be brought to the barest minimum when our processes and the issues that leave vulnerability, open us to vulnerability to corruption. If we're able to put systems in place, that will go a long way to help us in the fight against corruption. Because at the end of the day, if we are able to do that, then even when something goes wrong and we want to gather evidence, we'll have the audit trail to help us to put our evidence together. And at the end of the day, as long as we are unable to do that, as long as we are not able to put credible evidence before the courts, as long as we are not able to investigate the cases well, most people who get involved in this thing will get away with it. And the public will continue to shout, the institutions are not doing well, the institutions are not doing well. But systems at every level of state institution, from the basic to the top, we need to put systems in place. Systems that will not give anybody opportunity to be corrupt. And something that I do that has worked for me, and I think when it comes to measuring whatever that we've done that has worked, is that at YOKO, if we don't have money, we don't approve any purchases. We look at what we have and how much we can spend. So we have avoided a situation where we have PVs piled up, where people will come to see somebody with a gift or something, so that that PV will be paid. So the moment we say we are buying this, it means we have money to pay for it. And the point is that sometimes there are certain things that we might not even need to purchase. We can still work within the limited resources that we have. It's about management. So if you don't create the opportunity for people to be corrupt, it will be brought to the minimum level. And once again, I want to say thank you. I know I'm working within time, and I'm open for questions if you have any. And to add to what my brother said, are we really interested in fighting corruption? And if we are not, then we should let everybody to know that we are not. But if we are really interested, then let's prove it. Let's show. Let's be committed in the fight against corruption. Thank you very much.
Please put your hands together again for the YOKO boss. Corruption would always fight back. So it is for us to be resolute in our commitment to fight it. And so corruption would always fight back. Usually I tell people that if you want to see how easy corruption fights back, you wait until a police officer stops you when you have done the wrong thing. And you know how we do it in Ghana. You get down, and in some cases, you want to try and give something to the police officer. Let the police officer say, hey, are you trying to bribe me? Oh, no, it's a gift. You know? So when they stop us from doing the wrong thing, we want to get them to come along with us. And when we attempt to corrupt them and they want to fight back, then we turn and come back and say, oh, it's a gift. But you wait until the person takes that gift and walk away and say, oh, I gave me a bribe. So corruption will always fight back, even at the minimum small levels, the micro, what we call systemic, petty corruption level, people will fight back. At the large and grand grand levels, the fight back can be as deadly as your life. I was in Malta a couple of years ago, and whilst we were happy enjoying the ambience of the sea, we heard there was trouble. What was the trouble? A very prominent and very active journalist who has been on the case of corrupt politicians was shot in his house. They had put a bomb on under his car, and he sat in the car and the bomb exploded and he died right there and then. And it was so sad. So corruption will fight back. You and I would have to support that. Otherwise, at the end of the day, it is us. Let's take, I'm sure you've been here, you have something to say. I don't want you to go home with what you had and what you brought here, especially that we have access to all of this array of expertise on the table. We'll be happy to hear from you. And so if you are, let's see if we have a microphone down. Yes, madam. I'm happy to see it's a woman whose hand goes up first. Thank you, madam. Please, your name, your organization, and your question. And if you want to direct the question to a particular speaker, it's okay. Otherwise, if it's a general question, we would let each of them attempt. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my name is Nayele Adefiu-Setre. I work with the Trade Union Congress Ghana.
Okay.
And a pressure organization. I mean, we need no introduction, but definitely everybody knows that we're a pressure organization for workers.
Yes.
The ordinary people in the streets. So when I am told or asked that, do you want to fight corruption? I actually accept the question. Why? Because, Prof, you just told us that if you saw a policeman who stopped you in the streets and asked you, hey, are you trying to bribe me? Then you say, oh, no, it's just a gift. And you're telling me that it's not part of our culture. Then I have questions to ask.
Yes.
But you didn't do a presentation, so I'm not asking you any questions.
Yes, we can have the conversation around gifts.
Yes.
We'll talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then my thing is, my question is to Mamitewa. And for me, it's very intriguing that a particular issue would be handed over to the YOKO by the Office of the
Special Prosecutor.
Yes. I don't understand that. I'm not a legal luminary. I don't know anything about law and all that. But what I know is that when the special prosecutor says to politicians who have had elections over the weekend that if I hear an individual has given bribes or any monies or TNT to any delegate, and the political party comes out to say, well, we did well because we didn't see anybody given any. For me, that's effective because I don't know anything about law.
Yeah.
There are too many of our television stations and radio stations that have captured in previous times politicians being given monies to go and vote. And for me, I want the practical thing. So when anybody stands up and tells me about systems, about this and about that, I don't understand. What I want to see as an ordinary worker in the street is that you tell the person who is being given big, huge, $1 million or whatever amount of TNT that if you take it, I will come after you. For me, that works. And I think that that is what we have to do. That is the way to go. Not to change the goalposts and say, okay, so OSP, everybody is coming after them. And I agree with you, brother. Everybody comes after you. And he says that, okay, for whatever reasons that some issues or some matters are handed over to other organizations.
I'm passing on the back to another person.
Yes, indeed.
It's concerning.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, Dan. We will take a few more questions and we will come to the table. So question number one, why are you passing the trouble? Are you doing organizational gymnastics from one person to another person? They will both answer. Yes, please. Your name, your institution, and then you go ahead and ask your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Maoli Dake, and I'm an active citizen.
Okay.
And talking about state capture, we are often alarmed by the economic capture.
Right.
But I'm usually even more worried about the political capture. For example, as a consolidating democracy, there were institutions that came up that we were proud of as institutions that will help us confront some of these issues, fight corruption. But in recent times, you will notice, for those of us who pay attention, you will notice that some of these institutions, state agencies, are not only failing to play their role, some of them have actually become tools in the hands of power to do the opposite of what they were set up to do. For instance, institutions that are set up to fight corruption, for instance, these days, some of them, when you hear that their cases are being referred to them to investigate, you know that, okay, it's not going to go anywhere because, at least from our perspective, they have become tools that are used to cover up and legitimize some of them. We see it across board. So we know, for instance, that we don't have much confidence in a lot of the state institutions. I didn't have much confidence in the Office of the Special Prosecutor, but leadership matters. We are seeing signs of leadership emerging from there. And I just want to say that that's a good sign. And we want to tell him that, well, he may not have the whole nation behind you, but there are people that are willing to support. And we are hoping that you have the confidence. I watched his press statement the last time, and I can feel the pain in his voice. He should do it for the country, and maybe it will be the beginning of things turning around. And my second and last point has to do with the comments. A lot of the speakers have talked about how we all have a role. Yes, we have a shared responsibility as a people, and we all have a role. But that doesn't mean that we have equal responsibility. It's not everybody who runs an institution with 10 million, 100 million to fight corruption. So yes, we have a shared role, but some of you have constitutional obligation with state power and resources. And we expect you to do more than the usual. We all have shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we got 3 in 2 questions. Why pass on cases, political capture, and the aftermath of that, if you like. That is what the professors that wrote Why Nations Fail call extractive institutions. Institutions of the state that are used by politicians to extract rent and to extract powers to themselves. There's one before. Okay, there's one before.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Klaus Ebwaten. I work for the British High Commission.
Yes, please.
My question goes to Prof. He mentioned leadership as a very critical ingredient. And then in his indicators for effective governance, he also mentioned how leadership are selected or appointed as very critical. In his experience, exploring data across the world, how does this come into play? In some countries, heads of accountability institutions, similar to YOKO, SP, get there on merit. It's an open competition. Whereas in our case, it's by appointment. It's human nature that when somebody has appointed you to head an institution, you will turn around and hold the person accountable. And this has been playing out in a very subtle way. So my question is that all over the world, are those that do that through meritocracy better than those of us who are through appointment. Because there's also the other bit of culture which we have debunked. But the reality is that where we come from, culture seems to play a bit of a role. But then if you have stronger institutions, it should be able to control those aspects of, the rules of the game. So I just want to hear from him how these things play out in countries where it's on merits and in our case where it's by appointment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Professor, note it, and perhaps to help us understand, because if you take the two contrasting jurisdictions, it may be difficult for us to understand. Within our context, for example, the African context, for example, other developing country context, are there countries that the accession to institutions that are mandated to fight corruption are done apolitically, and what are some of the impacts of those as against places where these institutions have also become political, as it were? If you like, the person to be held ultimately responsible is the one selecting the people who must hold them ultimately responsible. Yes, sir. Mr. Gantua, did I get the name right?
Yes, and I don't need to introduce myself.
Please do. Not everybody knows you here. I know that you're a very popular face, but please go ahead.
My name is Kami Jantua. I'm with the CPP and I'm also with AGI.
Okay.
My comment and question goes to my learned friend.
Yes, Professor, this is for you.
No, OSP.
Oh, okay. Oh, SP. They say we should say SP, Special Prosecutor.
SP.
Yes, sir.
I don't see where you hire a servant in your house and the servant in your house tries to bribe you. I don't understand it. Because when we have elections, we have a group of people who we vote for to serve us. But the servant then turns around to bribe us. I don't understand it. But my question is, to my learned friend, the SP, would you say your predecessor's comments with regards to the OSP's office has turned out to be true? Second question.
Could you make reference to the specific comment so that it's in context?
Generally, what he said, what Martin Amedu said about the OSP's office and the challenges that he faced with the OSP's office.
Okay, thank you.
And
second question, please.
In your own thoughts, what do you think is the answer to resolving the challenges with the OSP's office vis-a-vis the politicians we have in this country today? Because as you rightly said,
sorry, go ahead.
We want to fight corruption, but we don't want to fight corruption. And last of all, the three fingers, we are pointing a finger at you, but three pointing back at us. What is our responsibility in terms of the people? Because you hear people say, we are not in that position. If we, the public, were in that position, what will we do? We will do the same thing. Is that analogy true? Where, although we point the fingers at you, the three fingers pointing back at us show that we would do the same thing if we were there. Thank you.
Prof, let's take the last one at the back here.
Yes, and then we'll come back. Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. I think I can speak while seated. Is that okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think the challenge we have...
Your name first, please, and the institution you
Oh, Thomas Istole is my name. I'm a concerned African, but also a student of governance and development.
Sure.
Yes, I think the challenge we have in Africa is that we, as citizens, have entrusted our resources, especially looking at our politicians, to the people who are corrupt. And we think that these corrupt leaders that we have elected into public offices are going to fight corruption. I think that's where we are losing the struggle against corruption, appointing into public office corrupt leaders that we then mandate to fight corruption. In other words, to fight themselves. That is not possible. So I think we have a governance crisis, a rule of the law crisis in Africa, where there is state capture. Our institutions have been disabled by the leaders who occupy them. And we cry foul when they don't perform as per their mandate. Yet in the first place, they're not supposed to be there. My second question to the lady, I didn't get her name, sorry. Yes, she gave so much emphasis on evidence.
Evidence, okay.
Yes, and I agree entirely with her. But we have seen many a time where institutions of state have been captured, that even the evidence itself does not see the light of day. And where is the role of whistleblowing? I will last end by asking what lessons can we draw from especially Asian tigers, China being an example. I think at some point, China had very corrupt leaders, but right now, probably is one of the ingredients that has led to their re-emergence as a superpower. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to allow the team to respond to the questions as they want.
Madam, you directed the question to my sister, but I think it should be to me, because it was the decision of the Office of the Special Prosecutor to refer to refer the matter for further action to the Economic and Organized Crime Office. And so, in fairness, I should answer that. So I will insulate her and seal her mouth, since she is the referee and not the referrer. Right. See, we have our mandates cut out by the law. If you would recall, when my sister was presenting, she said that formerly corruption and bribery used to be YOKO mandates, but they no longer are. And so it is our mandate by law by which we act. So in the course of an investigation, this is not the first time this is happening. It's only because this is a very sensitive case in which the public is so much interested. That is why you're hearing of it, and that is why we had to do a public announcement of it. The past year, YOKO has referred 3 cases to the OSP, but because they were not that high profile and sensitive, you wouldn't hear about them, but they referred the cases to us and we are handling. It's because at some point in their investigation, they noticed that what they were seeing was more in relation to corruption and corruption related, in which case the OSP has a direct mandate than they do, and so they had to refer the matter to the OSP. This is on the same principle by our establishing enactments, that we have to collaborate with each other and refer cases to each other when we notice that we are unable to continue by operation of law. So in respect of this particular matter, after 7 months of investigation, it seemed to us that it was more in relation to something in which the OSP did not have a direct mandate by law. And so if we were to go ahead to still keep the case with us and be investigating it, we're just wasting time. So the best possible outcome is to give it to the institution which has a direct mandate in respect of what it seemed to us that we were seeing, for them to continue to take further action. So it is really saving resources in a joint team effort. That's all it is about. I hope this satisfies you. And right, I sealed your mouth.
Oh no. About the second person who asked the question that in some cases, once the case is referred, you know it is not going anywhere because the public has lost interest in the institution, the confidence in the institution. The issue is that my KJTR law tells me that nothing is a crime unless there's an enactment making it a crime. And the enactment will define what it is and tells you the things that you need and then define the elements of it, what somebody has to do before you can say that this is a crime and these are the elements of it. This is my little KJTR law. Unfortunately for me, I'm not a learned friend, but I have friends who are learned. The point is that when the issues come up and it comes out loudly, people will try and convict the person in the court of public opinion. And most of the things that they talk about are suspicions. And suspicions is not that you can present to any court. So at the end of investigation, because you would have had this kind of, oh, the person is guilty, the person has done this, the person has done. In reality, you don't have that kind of evidence to support your case. It doesn't mean the person, the institution has done something to it, but you need to gather your evidence. And the standard that my friends who are learned will tell you is beyond reasonable doubt. So you don't go to court with suspicion. You go to court with evidence. So that is why sometimes the public will say we don't have any confidence in the institution, probably because all the cases that have come before that institution are not those that they could support with any credible evidence to secure conviction in court. And what is the point when at the end of the day you finish your investigation and you don't have any evidence to present before court? And it will be a complete waste of everybody's time when you go to court and the case is thrown out because you don't have evidence A. And most of the things that are expected of you are defined by law. So you don't just go anything because somebody is saying it without supporting it with evidence. That is what I want to talk about. I think if there's something that
I think 3 questions were thrown at me, Mr. Gentwa. Prof, you have the microphone to yourself when I'm done. Right. So what can be done to strengthen the OSP? Okay, why don't we start by entrenching it? Why don't we write it into the Constitution? Why don't we enlarge its powers? Why don't we insulate it from political marginalization? Why don't we insulate it from reprisals? Why don't we assure flow of resources to the office? Then also I'm thinking, why can't we include the OSP in the membership of the Judicial Council, for instance? These will let it sit firmly. In our estimation, my predecessors' comments about the challenges facing the office, he said, you did not pinpoint what particular comment, but challenges facing the office, as I've already talked about it in my presentation, the pivotal one. Beyond existential challenges, the challenges facing most public institutions, but unique to the OSP is getting it fully established and operational, because it is new. As I said in my presentation, it's just 6 years old, from 2018 to 2024. Yeah? January 2018 to January 2024, just 6 years old. So 6-year-old child, as I put it, what do you do with a 6-year-old child? You kill it, or you nurture it to grow. So say that's about that one. What can the citizenry do? I think I alluded to it a bit in my presentation. It is not only political actors. It is not only leadership. We often point fingers to leaders. But the citizens ourselves, are we free from blame? Are we free from sin? And I had a boneda. Penifo pen ebony. Say and ebony. And so that is why I said, do we really genuinely detest corruption? Or we are accepting it as part of our culture? And this has nothing to do with political actors or leadership. It has everything to do with the citizens. That's where I was referring. My comment was directed at the citizenry. Too often you see when there's a matter against your opponent and you are agog happy that the OSP is investigating the matter. Flip the coin. Tomorrow, if it is against your friend or associate, you are up in arms calling for the crucifixion of everyone who is associated with the OSP. With this kind of mindset, it would appear that we only go around in circles in trying to address the problem. So, that's all I can say on that. Thank you.
Okay. It's been a long day and many rich comments and questions. So without doing full justice to all the good questions and comments that were just made, I'll just try to bundle them into maybe 5 takeaways around one issue, which is the need for some courage, boldness, and audacity. And that has been possible and has been seen by some real champions of reform and anti-corruption in Ghana and in many other countries. So I'm bundling basically the excellent comments by a trade union citizen, by an active citizen, by a British commissioner citizen, and other such questions that came. And first, very quickly, an anecdote of very long ago when we were asked to help with a diagnostic in a country on governance and anti-corruption and to look at each institution with the people in that country. That was a country of Georgia, just before a president took power. And out of that diagnostic, which was presented by the president-to-be, eventually what came out was that the most corrupt institution was the traffic police. And then in his inauguration, among other measures, he said, I'm not going to announce now that I will change the head or that I will start a review, I will start a study. As of tonight, that institution ceases to exist, period. And then other changes ensued. It's just, and one should not be saying, well, that's exactly what we need now. But sometimes it's important to just say, we need to think out of the box, and if there are bold champions and there is leadership. And in a way, in a country that, especially when there are months before election, and citizens can demand, as part of convening forums and so on, each candidate, okay, what's your platform on anti-corruption? What are you going to do about A, B, C, and D? It could be transformed into an opportunity. Another form of boldness, which didn't catch the news too much. Some countries have special legal statutes to fight the most vicious type of corruption, which is around organized crime, which is capture of the most acute time. The United States has the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Act, which is, the acronym is RICO. RICO was created during the 70s to fight the mafia in New York and other places, which is making havoc. The RICO statute was just used with total absolute boldness by prosecutors in Georgia to accuse the ex-President Trump of crimes. And now we'll see what happens in the court, and there are all kinds of issues, and it's being delayed and so on. But it's a way of using the tools on the legal side to do that. Then there was a discussion on meritocracy. Again, boldness. Yes, at one level one can say, of course, we need more meritocratic systems. Meritocracy, obviously, all the studies show is incredibly important. When elections take place in Japan, how many people have to leave, and it's a change of government, and change of party in government. How many people change jobs, have to leave jobs, and there's a new political appointees? 12, the number of ministers, nobody else. Everybody else is a civil servant. In a very small country like in Bolivia, it's 60,000. So one has to start by looking at the whole, basically, political aspect, and by having a public sector and political reform, which is much deeper, which says we're not going to have basically everybody as a political appointee or an enormous amount of that. And there are different examples in the world. Probably the most meritocratic country, which has other problems, but it's very meritocratic, is Singapore. And in Africa, the picture is more mixed, but there are some countries one could look at. The fourth and before last point, which is very important in terms of also innovation and boldness, and we had just an exchange in writing, is what has been used very effectively in countries like the United States, but more recently, in the case of Brazil, in the major state capture scandal of Lava Jato, Odebrecht, and Petrobras, which is all over the web, which is the legal statutes of plea bargaining. Through plea bargaining, on your side, you can offer a lower penalty, basically, to some of those, because they always collude, some of the colluders, the first one who is prepared to come forward and tell you all about it, and give all the information about others. So instead of saying, which is very legitimate, we need the evidence to be able to prosecute. Obviously, we do. The question is what kind of incentive and what can be done to get that evidence. Plea bargaining offers an avenue to get enormous amount of evidence, because if they're going to get a lower sentence, they're going to speak. There's much more to be discussed about that. Whistleblower helps a lot of that. Finally, it's the issue of data, not only related to whistleblower, but also to fight impunity more generally is very important. Some countries try to see, well, what is the effective conviction rate? How many of the people who have been accused of corruption, especially in the elite and so on, eventually end up being convicted? Some countries, it's extremely low. You would know better what the data is here, and others are. Now, if that data is collected and it can create a consciousness among the citizenry and the population to demand for change and to demand accountability from the leaders. But basically, initiatives that help with data, with evidence, to address a major problem of impunity, which has been discussed today here, offer also a path forward. But of course, an element of boldness is needed for that, because it's not only hard work, sometimes it's risky work, as we know from my right here, and that should be commended. But with that type of boldness, there are countries that have shown that, yes, it can be done, and changes have taken place in many different regions and countries in the world over the past 20 years, showing case studies of that, of which, for lack of time, I won't give more, but I try to give a few. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have had enough. Please pardon me and let me bring the discussion to a close now. We've been privileged and listened to very inspiring messages this afternoon. Mavis began with us and gave us a quick rundown of the Afrobarometer data. We went online and took a snapshot from Mr. Bright Simmons when he spoke to us about state capture. The professor continued and gave us evidences from across the world, and then we brought it home and listened to our two eminent public officials who have been at the forefront of fighting corruption. Mr. Kisia Jabin, in charge of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, and Madam Tiwa, in charge of YOKO. You had your turn and asked a question. I'm sure that the conversations will continue. Madam from the TUC said that we can't just keep talking, but we just have to keep talking. Madam Tiwa also made inferences to that. We can't just keep talking, but we just have to keep talking. Because one of the very, very poignant, or if you like, powerful tools to fight corruption is when it is talked about. And I think we need to continue to talk. Our African brother at the back, you said something very, very interesting. We elect corrupt officials and we expect them to fight themselves. The truth is that I don't think the officers we elect are corrupt. I think we are all corrupt. And we elect the best amongst us into politics. Because otherwise, if we succeeded in kicking out one group of corrupt officials, the country should be better, isn't it? But across the continent, if you see the data, government after government have led us to much deeper mess when it comes to the issue of corruption. That is what A.L. Adu, who rose to become the Secretary General for the Commonwealth Secretariat, and at some time was at GIMPA, said that what is corrupt is not a Ghanaian civil servant, but the Ghanaian society. And out of the society, we select the corrupt civil service or servant. And he puts an analogy. He says if you picked up a fish from a polluted river, that fish is certainly polluted. And his advice is that the fight against corruption should not be a fight targeted only at the officers who are there now, but it should be a fight targeted at the entire Ghanaian society, and I dare say the entire African society. It is the only way by which we are able to run the stock of corrupt officers who will take the next government dry. And if we don't have them, then those who will go there are certainly going to be great. I think on that note, I want to thank our speakers and to say that for us as a business school, what we do is to teach and to mentor the next generation of business people and politicians. And we'll be happy to work with your offices in the way that we can target the young ones even before they leave here, and to help them to appreciate why they should not join the corruption bandwagon. So it is important that we note that corrupt officials are not from the moon, they are from us. Also, I think it's become very clear, and as we keep going, we notice that the state is becoming weaker and weaker in its ability to restrain corrupt officials. What that means is that if individuals refuse to restrain themselves, then the fight would actually inundate the officials who are mandated to do that. My charge to you this afternoon, and for those of us listening online, is that restrain yourself. So I will restrain myself from being corrupt. Restrain yourself from being corrupt. And let us be part of those who will provide the data and evidence that is required by these institutions to be able to do the work. And if you restrain yourself and I restrain myself, their work will be lacking because they will have less number of corrupt officials to chase. In that case, they can be more effective. So join us to restrain ourselves, and please restrain a brother and a sister as well. My last point is to say, don't just say something when you see a corrupt activity going on. Get involved to make sure that you provide the evidence. And often people will not steal money, as we say, but they will do other negative things. And that is how I got very depressed yesterday when I came to the campus. And I'm sure if you came to campus, you saw. For the past 1 week, we have graduated 15,000 plus students. And our campus got turned into a refuse dump. These are students who are graduating with first classes, and they hold parties with their families, and they mess up the entire campus. These are the next ministers, the next presidents. What do we expect from them? You and I have a responsibility. Let me thank CDD for muting the idea of this important lecture. And let me quickly thank all of the partners. My school, the business school, Ghana Integrity Initiative. I see Mary is here. Mary, there's an event tomorrow, right? Yes, it's at the Nat Hall. Yes, 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Yes, please. So tomorrow there's a conversation that extends this conversation. And it focuses on an important or some important actors, for example, the justice system. And the officers here can do a lot of work if they took that case to the court and our lords decide to throw it out. We are finished. So tomorrow be there to support GII as they extend the conversation. And then we have Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, Imani Ghana, and the Imani president himself joined the conversation together with the Vice President, Mr. Bright Simmons, the Africa Center for Energy Policy, and GRASAC. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for making time to stay with us this afternoon. I hope that in future you will join the conversation again, because this conversation must definitely keep going on. I see the Director of Policy and Advocacy, Mr. Kojo, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante. He's been quiet and sitting down. We thank you for broaching this idea. And thank you very much. Have a blessed and pleasant evening. Thank you.
You, Prof.
Thank you so much.